I had been planning this hiking trip for weeks, eager to escape the city and spend a few days alone in the wilderness. I picked a remote trail deep in the mountains, a place few people ventured into, promising peace and quiet. The morning I left, the sky was clear, the air crisp and cool, and the smell of pine filled the atmosphere. I packed light but enough: water, food, a map, a compass, a flashlight, and a sturdy knife strapped to my belt. I felt ready for whatever the wild had in store. The first day was peaceful, almost too peaceful. The trail wound through tall trees, with sunlight filtering through the leaves and casting long shadows on the ground. Birds chirped softly in the distance, and a gentle breeze rustled the branches. I moved steadily, careful with each step as the path was uneven and littered with rocks and fallen branches. Around noon, I stopped by a small creek to refill my water bottle and eat some trail mix. The cold water was refreshing, and I rested on a flat rock, soaking in the quietness. No one was around, and I felt completely alone, but in a good way. As I continued, the trail began to climb steeply. My legs burned from the effort, but I kept pushing, eager to reach a clearing where I planned to camp. The trees grew denser, their thick trunks blocking out most of the sunlight. The air grew cooler, and a damp smell rose from the earth. The ground beneath my boots felt soft and uneven, covered in moss and fallen leaves. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of animal tracks in the mud, deer or maybe something bigger. By late afternoon, I reached the clearing I had aimed for. It was a small open space surrounded by towering pines, their needles carpeting the ground in green. The sky above was still bright, though streaked with orange as the sun began its descent. I set up my tent quickly, laying out my sleeping bag inside and organizing my gear. After a simple dinner of canned beans heated over a portable stove, I sat outside watching the sun sink behind the mountains, painting the sky in deep reds and purples. That night, I fell asleep to the sounds of the forest, an owl hooting in the distance, the rustle of leaves, and the faint snap of twigs. I felt calm, even happy to be so far from civilization. But sometime around midnight, I woke up. Something had disturbed me, a sound unlike the usual forest noises. It was soft at first, barely audible. A low crunching noise, like someone stepping carefully on dry leaves. I froze, my heart pounding. The wind was still, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. I stayed quiet, listening. The sound came again, closer this time, slow and deliberate. It wasn't the movement of an animal. It was heavier, more careful. I reached for my flashlight, switching it on without making a sound. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees near my tent. I saw nothing but shadows and the rough bark of the trunks. The noise stopped. I waited, breath held, but no more sounds followed. My mind raced with thoughts. Who could be out here this late? The trail was supposed to be empty at night. Maybe another hiker? But no one had passed me during the day. I stayed awake the rest of the night, flashlight in hand, eyes darting to every shadow, every movement. When dawn came, the forest looked peaceful again. I packed up quickly, eager to leave that spot behind. As I hiked down the trail, the morning light revealed something strange. Footprints in the dirt, large and heavy. Not animal prints, but human-like. They circled my campsite and headed into the trees in the direction I had come from. They were fresh, the edges sharp and clear. The trail grew steeper, and I moved faster, glancing behind every few minutes. The footprints stayed visible for a while, then disappeared where the path became rocky and uneven. Still, the feeling of being watched clung to me. Every snap of a branch, every rustle of leaves made me jump. I kept reminding myself that it was just my imagination or the forest itself. Midday came, and I reached a small ridge overlooking a valley. I paused to catch my breath and looked out at the vast wilderness. The sun was high, and the temperature warmed up. Suddenly, I noticed something else. On a rock near the edge of the ridge, something shiny caught the sunlight. I walked closer and saw a small, worn-out watch, dirt-covered but intact. I recognized the style. It was the same model I had seen on other hikers around here. Nothing unusual except that it was broken, the hands frozen at exactly 2:13. I pocketed the watch, uneasy but curious. I moved on, trying to shake off the feeling that I was stepping into something I didn't understand. The trail curved downward, and soon I reached a small campsite with an old fire pit. It looked like someone had been here recently, maybe days ago. Scattered around were a few empty cans, some broken branches arranged oddly, like markers. My skin crawled. The sun began to dip as I continued. I tried to keep calm, telling myself it was just a person who left in a hurry or moved on. But the forest was growing darker faster than I expected. The wind picked up, cold and sharp, making the trees sway and creak. I had to find shelter soon. I spotted a small cave entrance partially hidden by bushes near the trail. It wasn't big, but it looked dry and safe enough for a night. I didn't like the idea of stopping there, but the sky was nearly black now, and I didn't want to risk hiking in the dark again. I set up my sleeping bag inside the cave, blocking the entrance with some branches. As I lay down, my mind replayed everything. The footsteps, the watch, the campsite, the strange feeling of being followed. I tried to fall asleep, but every sound outside made me tense. Then, I heard it again. The crunching of leaves, the slow, heavy steps around the cave entrance. I held my breath, clutching my knife, the flashlight at the ready. Hours passed. The steps circled the cave, stopped, and then retreated. When morning finally came, I wasted no time packing up. I stayed alert as I made my way down the mountain, the forest now quiet except for natural sounds. Back at my car, safe on the paved road, I looked at the watch again. It was strange how time had stopped at 2:13. I never found out who had left it or who had made those footsteps. But what I do know is this. Someone had been watching me that whole time, moving quietly through the forest, staying just out of sight but close enough to keep track. No ghosts, no fantasy, just a person maybe lost or dangerous, and me lucky enough to get away. That experience changed how I see the wilderness. It's not always calm or peaceful. Sometimes, it hides people and dangers we can't see until it's too late. And when you're alone, every sound, every shadow, can mean the difference between safety and something much worse. I'm glad I made it out, and I won't be going back to that trail again anytime soon. I set out early in the morning, just before sunrise, eager for a long day of hiking. The trail I chose was one I hadn't tried before, a remote path winding through thick forest and rugged hills. I liked the challenge and the promise of solitude. The air was crisp, the kind that feels fresh but carries a faint chill, the smell of pine and damp earth filling my lungs with every breath. I carried a light pack, water, some food, a first aid kit, a flashlight, and my trusty knife. I planned this trip for weeks, mapping out the route carefully, making sure I had enough supplies and that someone knew where I was going. I felt ready. The first few hours passed smoothly. The path was narrow but clear, weaving between tall trees and large rocks. Sunlight filtered through the branches, making patches of gold on the forest floor. Birds chirped, and a breeze rustled the leaves. I kept a steady pace, stopping every now and then to drink water and take pictures of the view. I noticed the forest getting thicker as I climbed higher. The trees were older, taller, their trunks thick with moss. The ground beneath my boots was soft with pine needles, damp from overnight dew. I liked the quiet here, broken only by the natural sounds around me. Around midday, I reached a small clearing. It was a perfect spot to rest, with a view of a distant mountain ridge and a small stream trickling nearby. I sat on a fallen log, eating a sandwich and filling my water bottle at the stream. The water was cold and tasted clean. I was feeling good, a little tired but happy. I checked my map and realized I was halfway through the planned route. The rest of the hike would take me deeper into the forest, where the trail was supposed to get rougher. After about 20 minutes, I packed up and continued. The path grew steeper and less defined. I had to step over fallen branches and loose stones. The trees were spaced further apart, and the sunlight was harsh now, beating down without much shade. I kept glancing around, noting the shapes of the trees and rocks, making mental markers so I wouldn't get lost. But something started to feel off. I noticed that the trail signs were missing. The painted markers on trees I had seen earlier just stopped. I checked my map again, but it was a general overview, and the details here were scarce. I realized I hadn't seen another person since early morning. The forest felt too quiet now. The birds had stopped singing, and the breeze was still. The only sound was the crunch of my boots on the dry leaves. I tried to stay calm. I told myself that the trail probably got less maintained here, that I just needed to keep going straight to find the next marker. But after an hour, I still hadn't seen any signposts or obvious paths. The underbrush was thick, and I had to push branches aside to keep moving forward. My legs were getting scratched and my shirt torn in places. I stopped to rest and pulled out my phone to check my GPS. No signal. Nothing but the words searching, blinking at me. That didn't surprise me much. Remote forest areas often had no coverage. Still, it made me uneasy. The sun was already low in the sky, and shadows stretched long. I decided to keep moving downhill, hoping to find the main trail or some sign of people. The trees grew denser again, and the forest floor was uneven with roots and rocks. I slipped once and caught myself just in time. My heart raced. I reminded myself to watch my step. Suddenly, I heard it, a faint, low rustling in the bushes behind me. I stopped, holding my breath, and listened carefully. The sound stopped. Maybe an animal? I thought. Nothing to worry about. I moved faster. After a few minutes, the rustling came again, closer this time. Then I caught a glimpse of something moving between the trees. A shadow, quick and silent. I froze. It wasn't an animal. I couldn't tell what it was, but the movement was too deliberate, too quiet for a deer or a fox. The forest seemed to hold its breath. I picked up my pace, heart hammering. I didn't want to turn and look, but the feeling that someone or something was following me was growing stronger. I kept moving downhill, trying to keep my steps steady and quiet, but my nerves were on edge. Suddenly, I stumbled over a root and fell hard, scraping my hands and knees on the dirt and rocks. Pain shot through my palms. I looked up, expecting to see whatever had been following me. The forest was still again. No movement, no sounds. Only the wind blowing faintly through the leaves. I got up quickly, rubbing the dirt off my hands. My legs shook. I realized it was getting darker fast. I needed to find shelter or get back to the main trail soon. My flashlight was in my pack, but I didn't want to stop again and risk losing any more time. I moved forward, following what looked like an animal path. Narrow, barely visible, but downhill. After about 10 minutes, I saw something in the distance. A rusty metal fence with a gate hanging open. Relief washed over me. This had to be the edge of the park or a property boundary. I headed for it quickly, pushing through thick bushes. As I got closer, I saw a small cabin just beyond the fence, partially hidden by trees. The windows were dark, the wood old and weathered. I didn't want to stay outside after dark, so I decided to use the cabin as shelter for the night. I figured I could wait until morning and then find a road or trail to get help. I checked the door, it was unlocked. Inside was dusty and smelled like old wood and dampness. No electricity, just an old fireplace and some broken furniture. I set down my pack and sat on a creaky chair, my body exhausted but alert. I kept my knife close. The silence inside was thick. No sounds from outside except the wind through the trees. I tried to relax, telling myself I was safe for the night. I took out my water bottle and drank slowly. I checked my phone again, still no signal. As the darkness deepened, I felt a creeping sense of unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every small noise made me jump. The creak of the cabin, the scratch of branches against the windows. Then, I heard a soft tapping on the door. Not loud, but deliberate. I froze. No one else was supposed to be out here. I stayed silent, listening. The tapping stopped. Minutes passed with nothing. I thought maybe it was an animal, but the sound was too steady, too human-like. I moved to the door quietly and looked through a crack in the wood. Nothing but darkness. I backed away slowly, heart pounding. I decided I couldn't stay here. If someone was out there, I had to get out before it got worse. I packed my things as quietly as possible, grabbed my flashlight, and slipped out the back window. The forest was black now. I turned on the flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. I didn't know where I was exactly, but I headed away from the cabin, following the fence line, hoping it would lead me to a road. I walked for what felt like an hour, every snap of a twig or rustle making me freeze. Then I saw it, faint lights in the distance. Cars, houses. I pushed toward the glow, my steps faster now. I finally reached a dirt road. I was shaking, tired, and dirty, but safe. I found a house with a porch light on and banged on the door until someone came out. They called the police. Later, I learned that the area where I got lost was known for illegal hunting and trespassing, and the cabin I found was sometimes used by people living off the grid or doing illegal things. The tapping on the door was likely someone trying to find out if the place was empty. I was lucky to get out when I did. The forest wasn't just quiet and peaceful, it was dangerous in its own way. Not because of monsters or ghosts, but because of people who didn't want to be found and the wild that can turn unforgiving when you lose your way. That day, I learned that nature isn't just beautiful, it can be threatening if you aren't careful. And sometimes the scariest things aren't supernatural. They're real, close, and human. From then on, I never took a trail for granted, and I always made sure someone knew exactly where I was going. The forest taught me to respect its silence, and to fear what might be hiding in it. The day started like any other hiking trip. I was ready early in the morning, backpack packed with essentials: water, snacks, a first aid kit, map, compass, and a flashlight just in case. The weather was cool but clear, with the kind of fresh air that makes you feel alive. I had chosen a trail deep in the woods, somewhere I hadn't been before. The trail was supposed to be moderate in difficulty and about 10 miles long, perfect for a day hike. First, everything went smoothly. The trail wound through thick trees, tall pines and oaks, their leaves brushing lightly in the wind. Birds sang occasionally, and the crunch of my boots on dry leaves and twigs echoed softly. I followed the dirt path, careful to keep track of the markers carved into trees and rocks. The sun filtered through the canopy in dappled patches, warming the cool air. It felt peaceful, almost too peaceful. Around mid-morning, I reached a small clearing. There was a shallow creek running through it, water clear enough to see smooth stones beneath the surface. I knelt to fill my bottle, listening to the gentle rush of water. It was the kind of spot that invites you to pause and soak in the quiet. But then, something caught my attention. Across the creek, I spotted something strange. A series of footprints in the mud. They were large and looked like boot prints but not fresh. They seemed old, as if no one had stepped there for a day or two. The strange part was their pattern. They weren't following the trail but seemed to lead deeper into the woods, off the main path. Curious but cautious, I considered following them, but the sensible part of me urged to stick to the marked trail. I decided to continue hiking, leaving the prints behind, though a small unease began to grow in the pit of my stomach. As the hours passed, the trail grew narrower and less worn. The trees thickened, blocking more sunlight. The underbrush became denser, branches scraping my arms and legs. The trail markers became sparse too, and I found myself relying more on the compass and map. By early afternoon, I realized I had missed a turn. The trail forked, and I had taken the left path, but now I wasn't sure it was the correct way. I stopped, checked my map, and confirmed I should have taken the right fork back at the last junction. That meant I had walked at least an extra mile or more in the wrong direction. The thought of turning back crossed my mind, but I was stubborn and decided to keep going forward, hoping the path would circle back or meet the main trail soon. I figured if I kept heading roughly east, I'd find a road or another marked trail. But then the forest started to feel different. The air grew thicker, almost humid, and the sounds of birds and insects faded into an eerie silence. The usual wildlife seemed absent. Even the wind died down. It felt as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I pressed on, heart beating a little faster now. The trail became less distinct, just a faint line through the trees. At one point, I had to climb over a fallen tree, and my boots slipped on wet moss. I caught myself but realized I was getting tired and dehydrated. I stopped to take a drink and eat a granola bar. That's when I heard it, distant but sharp, the crack of a branch breaking. Not like the soft noise of the wind or an animal stepping lightly. This was deliberate, heavy. I froze, scanning the trees. Nothing moved. No animal ran. No bird flew away. Just silence again. I shook off the feeling and told myself it was probably a deer or some animal moving around. Still, I started walking faster, eyes darting to the shadows. Minutes later, the same noise happened again. This time closer. A crack of wood snapping sharply. It was definitely something big, but whatever it was stayed hidden. The uneasy feeling in my chest turned to a pit of dread. I reached for my phone to check for signal, hoping to call someone or at least check my GPS. Nothing. No bars, no service at all. The battery was around 50%, but the phone was useless without signal. I kept moving, trying to find the trail or any sign of a path. I realized that in all the time hiking, I hadn't seen another person. No other hikers, no sounds of people. Just me and the silence. As I walked, I noticed fresh footprints in the mud. These were bigger than mine, heavy boot prints, and they looked recent. They crossed the trail, leading deeper into the woods. My heart sank. I debated following them to see if they led somewhere safe or back to the trail. Part of me feared they belonged to someone who could help, but another part feared whoever left those prints might be the cause of those snapping sounds. I chose to follow the footprints anyway. The path was rougher, full of roots and rocks, and the forest seemed to close in tighter. The sun was dipping lower, and the temperature started to drop quickly. After a long, exhausting hike, I came to a small clearing. It wasn't marked on the map. In the middle, there was a makeshift camp. It looked hastily abandoned. Empty food cans, torn tarp, a small fire pit with cold ashes. I scanned the area but found no people, just the silence. Suddenly, I heard the crack of a branch behind me again. This time, closer. Too close. My heart jumped, and I spun around, ready to run, but no one was there. Then, I caught a movement in the trees. A flash of dark clothing, a figure slipping between the trunks and disappearing. I realized I was not alone in these woods, and whoever was here did not want to be found. Panic set in. I had no idea if this person was friendly or dangerous. I remembered the stories I'd heard about hikers getting lost and sometimes attacked in remote areas by people living off the grid or worse. I grabbed my backpack and started moving as fast as I could without making too much noise. My legs burned, and my lungs burned with every breath, but I knew I had to get out. I didn't look back. The snapping sounds and footsteps followed, sometimes close, sometimes distant, but always behind me. I was terrified, adrenaline pushing me forward. Finally, after what felt like hours but was maybe only 20 minutes, I broke through the tree line and saw the edge of the forest. The sun was almost gone. I ran the last stretch to the road, waving my arms frantically as a car passed by. The driver stopped. I was shaking, exhausted, and barely able to speak. They called the police. Later, the authorities told me the area I had been hiking in was known for illegal squatters and sometimes criminals hiding from the law. The footprints and the figure I saw probably belonged to them. They had been living rough, avoiding contact, but some had been aggressive in the past. The forest wasn't haunted by ghosts or monsters, just real people trying to survive outside society, sometimes crossing paths with innocent hikers like me. I never went back to hiking alone after that. The memory of those silent footsteps, the cold camp in the clearing, and the feeling of being watched stayed with me for a long time. But at least I made it out, and that clear, cold fact, that there are dangers in the real world you don't expect, stayed with me clearer than any story about ghosts ever could. I set out early in the morning, my backpack heavy with supplies and my boots laced tight for the long hike ahead. The trail was supposed to be simple, a moderate loop through the forest I had read about online. I had gone on plenty of hikes before, so I felt confident that I could handle whatever nature threw at me. The sun was just starting to rise when I stepped onto the narrow dirt path, surrounded by tall trees whose leaves whispered softly in the breeze. The air smelled fresh, the kind of clean scent that only a deep forest can hold. Birds chirped overhead, and the occasional rustle in the underbrush made me feel alive and alert. At first, the trail was peaceful. The ground was covered with a mix of dirt and fallen pine needles, and the path wound gently up and down small hills. I passed a few patches of wildflowers and stopped briefly to take in a clearing where sunlight poured through the branches, warming the mossy rocks. Everything felt like it should. I moved steadily, my steps steady and rhythmic. My legs warmed up as I went, and my breath fell into an easy pace. After about 2 hours, the trail began to feel less maintained. Branches stretched over the path, and leaves and twigs covered much of the ground. I noticed the quiet start to creep in. The birds stopped singing as much, and the breeze seemed to drop away. The forest thickened, the trees closing in like silent walls. I checked my map, and I was still on the right route, but the lack of footprints or other hikers made me feel a little uneasy. Still, I pushed on. About an hour later, I crossed a small wooden bridge over a creek. The water was clear and cold, tumbling over smooth stones. I paused to drink from my bottle and rest for a moment, glancing around at the dense woods on both sides. It felt darker here, even though it was still early afternoon. Shadows grew longer, stretching between the trees like fingers. I started walking again, but soon realized the trail was becoming harder to follow. The markers I'd seen earlier were missing, and the path seemed to split in several places with no clear direction. I pulled out my compass, but the needle was twitching oddly, never settling in one direction. That set off a warning bell in my head. I tried to retrace my steps, but the forest all looked the same, thick with tall pines and heavy undergrowth. The sun began to lower, its light dimming through the thick canopy. I knew I needed to find a clear path soon or set up camp before dark. My heart sped up. I kept moving, but my mind raced with doubts. What if I was lost? I hadn't told anyone exactly where I was going, assuming I'd be back before nightfall. Then I saw it. A thin trail, almost hidden under dead leaves, leading off in a direction that didn't match the map at all. It looked like a game trail, something animals might use. I hesitated, but the other paths led to nowhere or deeper into thick brush. Desperation pushed me forward. The trail narrowed, winding through dense bushes and low branches that snagged my clothes. My legs scratched and my boots slipped on loose dirt. I kept my head down, following the faint trail, telling myself I'd find my way back to the main path soon. Suddenly, I heard something, soft, deliberate footsteps behind me. My pulse jumped. I stopped and listened. The footsteps stopped too. I waited, holding my breath. After a moment, I started walking again, faster now, eyes scanning the trees. I didn't want to look back, but curiosity and fear made me glance over my shoulder. Nothing, just trees, thick and silent. I kept moving, but the feeling stayed. Someone or something was following. The footsteps came again, matching my pace, then slowed when I slowed. I tried to pick up speed, but the trail grew steeper and more tangled. My legs burned, my breath came faster, but I didn't dare stop. I found a rock outcropping and climbed up to get a better view. From the height, I could see the forest stretched endlessly, no signs of civilization anywhere. The sun was nearly gone, and the sky had turned a deep orange, fading to purple. The chill in the air grew stronger. I had to make a choice. Keep moving through unknown trails in fading light or try to find a place to camp. I chose to climb down and find a small clearing I'd spotted from the rock. I scrambled down, scraping my hands on rough bark and rocks, finally landing in the clearing. It was small, ringed by trees but clear enough to pitch my tent. I hurried to set up my tent, fumbling with the poles and stakes as the last light slipped away. My hands shook from exhaustion and fear. The forest noises grew louder in the dark. The rustle of animals, the distant call of owls, the snapping of twigs nearby. I sat inside the tent, heart pounding, every sound making me jump. The footsteps from earlier haunted my thoughts. I thought maybe it was an animal, but the pace and timing had felt too intentional, too close. Suddenly, I heard it again, footsteps moving slowly around the clearing, circling like a predator stalking prey. I held my breath, clutching my flashlight and a small knife I always carried. The footsteps stopped on the other side of the tent. A branch snapped. I forced myself not to scream, gripping the knife tightly. I switched on the flashlight, pointing it toward the sound. Nothing but darkness and trees. I whispered to myself that it was just a wild animal or maybe another lost hiker. Then the footsteps began again, moving away slowly, fading into the night. I stayed awake the whole night, too afraid to sleep, listening for any sign of movement. At dawn, I packed quickly and took a different direction, using the rising sun to guide me east. The forest seemed less threatening in daylight. After several hours of careful walking, I found a faint trail that led me back to the main path. The markers were clearer now, and I recognized a few landmarks from my map. By mid-afternoon, I reached the parking lot where I had started. Relief washed over me, and I collapsed on a bench, exhausted and shaken. I looked around at the other hikers, feeling a strange distance from them, as if I'd been somewhere else entirely. Later, I learned from a park ranger that the area I had wandered into was known for illegal hunting and sometimes dangerous people who didn't want visitors on their land. That explained the strange footsteps and why no one was around. I never went hiking alone after that, and I always told someone exactly where I'd be. The forest can be beautiful, but it can also hide very real dangers. Not from ghosts or monsters, but from people who don't want to be found. And sometimes, when you're alone in the woods, the scariest thing is knowing you might be watched by someone who isn't supposed to be there, and you don't know why. The trail was supposed to be simple, a day hike through the hills behind the city, something I had done plenty of times before. I packed my backpack the night before: water, some snacks, a map, a compass, and my phone, fully charged. The weather was clear, sunny with a few clouds drifting lazily across the sky. Perfect for a hike, I thought. I started early, just after dawn. The air was crisp, the smell of pine and earth fresh around me. The trail was well marked, winding through dense forest and over small streams. Birds chirped overhead, and the occasional rustle of squirrels added to the quiet. I felt relaxed, energized by the fresh air and the solitude. About 2 hours in, I reached a fork in the trail. According to the map, both paths would loop back to the same point eventually, but one was longer and more rugged. I chose the rougher path, wanting a bit of a challenge. The ground grew uneven, roots and rocks jutting out. The trees thickened, casting deeper shadows. I kept my pace steady, focusing on my footing. After another hour, I noticed the trail markers were getting fewer and farther between. The forest felt quieter now, almost unnaturally so. The birds had stopped singing. Even the wind seemed to die down. I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just a quiet patch. Suddenly, the path disappeared altogether. No clear trail in sight, just thick underbrush and trees. I stopped and pulled out the map, trying to figure out where I was. The compass needle swung wildly, not settling on a direction. My phone showed no signal. I felt a pang of unease. I decided to backtrack, but as I turned around, I realized the forest looked different behind me too. I couldn't see the path I had just walked. Panic started to rise. I called out, but my voice sounded swallowed by the trees. No answer. I tried to calm down. I had been on this trail before, I knew it well. Maybe I just took a wrong turn. I took a deep breath and moved slowly, looking for any sign of the trail. Hours passed. The sun started to dip low, but the forest stayed dark and still. The shadows grew longer. I realized I had lost track of time. My water was running low, and I hadn't eaten much. I tried to remember landmarks, but everything looked the same: trees, rocks, tangled branches. I felt trapped in an endless maze of green. Night was coming, and I didn't have a flashlight. I found a small clearing and decided to stay put until morning. I made a rough shelter with branches and leaves, tried to rest, but my mind raced. I kept hearing strange sounds, cracks of branches, low rustling. Nothing I could see, but definitely something out there. Morning came, but nothing had changed. The forest was still thick and confusing. I started walking again, hoping to find the trail or at least a way out. My legs were sore, my clothes torn from brushing through bushes. The forest floor was wet with dew and mud, making it harder to move fast. After hours of wandering, I stumbled on a narrow dirt path, barely visible under leaves. I followed it, heart pounding. It twisted and turned, and then suddenly, I saw a sign nailed to a tree. It was old and faded, but I could just make out the words, "Caution, private property. No trespassing." That didn't make sense. This was supposed to be a public trail. I pushed forward, hoping to find a road or a town. The path ended at a rusted gate, overgrown with vines and bushes. Behind the gate, I saw a small, abandoned cabin. The windows were broken, the door hanging open. Something about the place felt wrong, silent, and eerie. I circled around, looking for another way out. The sun was setting again, casting long shadows. I knew I couldn't spend another night in the forest, especially not near this strange place. Suddenly, I heard footsteps, not far away, crunching on dry leaves. I froze, listening. The steps stopped too. My heart hammered in my chest. I didn't want to look, but I had to know if someone else was out here. A man appeared, walking slowly toward the cabin. His clothes were dirty and torn, his face hidden under a hood. He didn't say anything, just stared. I felt my breath catch. I took a step back, but he didn't move. I turned and ran without looking back. The forest seemed to close in around me, branches scratching at my face and clothes. I didn't stop until I heard a distant sound, the hum of a car engine. I followed the noise, pushing through the trees. Finally, I broke through the forest edge and saw a road. A car was parked on the side, and a man was standing beside it. Relief flooded me. I ran to him and explained my situation with frantic gestures and breathless panting. He nodded and helped me into the car. We drove back toward town, leaving the dark forest behind. Later, I learned that the area I had wandered into was not on any public map. The trail was part of an old private hunting ground, abandoned but still dangerous. The man near the cabin was believed to be a trespasser living off the grid, known to scare off anyone who came near. I was lucky to get out when I did. My phone was dead, my water almost gone, and my body scraped and bruised. If I had stayed one more night in that forest without food or proper gear, I don't know what could have happened. From then on, I never took a trail for granted. I always checked maps carefully, told someone where I was going, and carried extra supplies. The forest isn't always as safe as it looks. Sometimes, the scariest things are not monsters or ghosts, but the very real dangers hidden beneath the trees. The lost paths, the unknown people, the quiet that can swallow you whole. That day taught me to respect the wild, to be prepared, and to never wander off alone without knowing exactly where I am. The forest doesn't care about you, and it won't help if you get lost. It just waits, patient and silent, and if you're unlucky, it might be the last place you ever see. I set out early that morning, just as the sun was beginning to push its light through the thick trees. The trail was supposed to be a quiet one, not very popular, winding deep into the forest. I was looking forward to a simple day hike. Just me, my pack, and the sound of the woods. The air was crisp and smelled of pine and damp earth. The path was narrow and uneven, scattered with roots and loose stones that demanded attention with every step. At first, everything felt calm and familiar. Birds called from high branches, and the occasional squirrel darted through the underbrush. I kept a steady pace, eyes scanning the ground for good footing and the occasional patch of wild berries. The forest was dense but not oppressive. There was enough light filtering through to keep the path clear and inviting. After about 2 hours, I reached a small clearing that overlooked a narrow valley. I paused there to catch my breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. The view was peaceful. A river snaking through the trees far below, mist rising off the water like smoke in the early morning. I checked my map and compass, confirming my route. From here, The trail was supposed to turn sharply east and follow the riverbank before looping back toward the trailhead. But when I started moving again, I noticed something odd. The trail became less obvious. The ground was disturbed, with broken branches and flattened grass that didn't look like it belonged to the trail. I stopped to look closer, but the faint path I'd expected was missing. Instead, the forest floor was cluttered with deep, uneven footprints, too large and spaced oddly to be human, but definitely not from any animal I recognized. They led off the path and into thicker trees. I hesitated but decided to follow them, thinking maybe they were a shortcut or a sign someone else had been here recently. The footprints led me downhill toward the river. The trees grew denser, and the light faded quickly under the heavy canopy. I could hear the distant rush of water but no other sounds. No birds, no insects, just the quiet hum of the forest pressing in. As I moved deeper, the air grew colder. My breath came out in short puffs. The trail disappeared altogether, replaced by uneven ground tangled with roots and fallen branches. My boots slipped on the mossy rocks. Every now and then, I caught the scent of something sharp and metallic in the air, like rust or blood. Suddenly, I heard it, a soft snapping of twigs behind me. I stopped dead and turned slowly, scanning the shadows. Nothing moved, but the feeling of being watched was heavy. My heart quickened. I told myself it was probably a deer or some small animal, but the sound was too deliberate, too close. I moved forward, but now I kept looking over my shoulder every few steps. The footprints stayed visible, as if someone or something had been dragging its feet through the mud. After what felt like an hour of stumbling through the underbrush, the ground leveled off, and I reached the riverbank. The river was swollen and fast-moving, wider here than I expected. The banks were steep and muddy, making it impossible to climb out once you were down there. The footprints ended abruptly at the water's edge. I scanned the far side of the river and saw a thin trail running parallel. It looked like a path carved by animals or people who crossed frequently. But there was no bridge, no fallen tree to cross on, just the roaring water. The sun was dropping behind the trees, and I realized I had no way to get across without risking a dangerous swim. I was deep in unfamiliar terrain, with no clear trail back and no signal on my phone. I sat down on a large rock, trying to calm my breathing. My mind raced with all the things that could go wrong. Getting lost, injured, caught in bad weather. I looked back the way I came and thought about the footprints. They seemed out of place, too large for any normal animal, and there was no sign of anyone else on the trail all day. Suddenly, I noticed something else. A small pile of rocks near the riverbank, arranged carefully like a marker. The rocks were smooth and dark, stacked in a way that didn't look natural. It gave me the chills, but I pushed the feeling aside. Maybe someone had left it there to mark the spot for crossing during low water. I decided I had to try to find a way back, even if it meant retracing my steps through the dense woods. Standing up, I took a deep breath and turned away from the river. As I made my way back, the shadows grew longer, and the forest seemed to close in tighter around me. The air was thick with the smell of wet leaves and moss, but now there was another scent mixed in. Something sharp and sour, like decay. I tried to stay focused on the path I had taken earlier, but the forest was confusing, and the light was fading fast. Suddenly, the soft snapping of twigs came again from behind me, faster this time. I broke into a run, pushing past branches and fallen logs. The underbrush tore at my clothes and skin, but I didn't slow. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breath came in ragged gasps. The snapping noise kept pace, always just behind me, but I never saw what was making it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the trees thinned, and I burst out onto the main trail. Relief washed over me. I kept running along the path, the sun nearly gone now, the forest dim and silent except for the crunch of my boots on the dirt. When I reached the trailhead, the parking lot was empty and dark. I unlocked my car, the shaking in my hands making it hard to start the engine. As I pulled out onto the road, I glanced back at the forest. It looked calm again, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. That night, lying in my bed, I thought about the footprints, the strange marker by the river, and the sound that followed me. Whatever had been out there with me wasn't some ghost or fairy tale monster. It was something real, something dangerous, and it was still in those woods. I knew I had been lucky to get away, and I promised myself I would never go back to that trail again. The forest can hide many things, and sometimes the scariest part is not knowing what's watching you from just beyond the trees. The morning air was crisp, the kind of fresh cold that makes your lungs feel sharp and awake. I had planned this hike for weeks, choosing a trail in a remote forest area known for its natural beauty and quiet solitude. It was the perfect escape from the city noise and the pressure of everyday life. The trail was supposed to be about 15 miles round trip, starting from a small dirt parking lot on the edge of nowhere, winding through thick woods, rocky ridges, and open meadows. I set off early, my boots crunching over dried leaves and small twigs scattered on the path. The trees stood tall and close, their branches weaving a canopy that let through patches of sunlight. Birds chirped in the distance, and the occasional rustle of small animals moved through the underbrush. I carried a heavy backpack loaded with water, snacks, a map, compass, and a small first aid kit. My phone had little signal out here, but I made sure to download offline maps just in case. At first, the hike was exactly as I expected. The trail was clear, marked by faded signs nailed to trees every few hundred feet. I paused a few times to catch my breath, drink water, and take in the quiet beauty. The deeper I went, the denser the forest grew. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. Every now and then, I noticed broken branches or flattened grass to the side of the trail, probably deer or other wildlife moving through. Around noon, I reached a small creek that crossed the trail. The water was cold and clear, tumbling over rocks. I stopped to refill my water bottle and splash some on my face. That's when I noticed something strange. Footprints in the mud by the water's edge. They looked fresh, too big and deep to be from any small animal. I frowned, glancing around. The forest felt quieter now, like the usual sounds had dropped away. No birds, no rustling, just silence. I decided to keep moving, figuring someone else might be hiking this trail. The footprints continued for a while alongside the trail, then disappeared. I checked my watch. I had plenty of time to finish the hike and get back before dark. Still, a little unease settled in my stomach. The trail soon climbed sharply, winding up a ridge. The trees thinned out, and I could see the forest stretching below in all directions. It was beautiful but also exposed. The wind picked up, chilling me even through my jacket. I pulled the hood over my head and moved faster. As I rounded the ridge, the path became less clear. The markers were old and faded, some missing entirely. I checked my map and compass carefully. The trail was supposed to curve left, heading down toward a small campsite near a lake. I thought I heard something behind me, a low snap of a branch, but when I looked back, nothing was there. I kept going, but now I was more alert, my eyes scanning the trees and bushes. The silence was heavy, almost unnatural. My heartbeat quickened. Then I heard it again, a distant rustling, like something big moving through the undergrowth, but not in the direction I had come from. It was deeper in the woods, somewhere ahead but off the trail. I stopped, breathing hard, gripping my trekking pole tight. The sound grew louder, crunching leaves and snapping twigs. It was too heavy to be a deer or smaller animal. My mind raced. What could it be? A bear? A wild boar? Neither was common here, but not impossible. I decided not to wait and started moving faster toward the campsite. The trees were denser again, shadows stretching long in the late afternoon light. The trail was harder to follow, but I kept my focus on the map and compass. Then I heard the noise again, closer this time. My skin prickled, and I broke into a light jog. My legs burned, but I pushed on. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shifted. I stumbled and fell forward onto loose gravel near the edge of a small clearing. I looked up and saw a pair of eyes staring back from the shadows across the clearing. They were not human eyes, too large, too reflective. I froze, heart pounding in my ears. The creature didn't move at first. I couldn't make out its full shape, but it was huge and low to the ground. Then it started to step forward slowly. I scrambled back on my hands and knees, trying to stay quiet, not looking away. The eyes followed me, unblinking. I remembered the bear spray in my pack. I reached for it slowly with one hand, ready to spray if it charged. The creature let out a low growl, more of a warning than an attack, and then turned and disappeared back into the trees. I stayed still for a long moment, every nerve on edge. I got up carefully and decided to take a different route, heading back the way I came, even though it would take longer. The forest seemed even darker now, and the trail was almost lost beneath leaves and fallen branches. The footsteps I had seen earlier no longer appeared, but the fear stayed with me. The sun sank lower, casting long shadows through the trees. I kept glancing behind me, expecting to see those glowing eyes again. Every noise, an owl hoot, a squirrel scampering, made me jump. I didn't stop until the parking lot came into view, the place where I had left my car. When I finally stepped out of the forest, the relief was overwhelming. I locked the car doors and sat inside, heart still racing. I knew what I had seen wasn't a ghost or some fairy tale creature. It was real, something wild and dangerous, probably a large predator that had been tracking the trail or defending its territory. I reported the sighting to the local ranger station the next day. They confirmed that there had been recent reports of a large cougar spotted in that forest. They warned hikers to be cautious and avoid the area until the animal was captured or moved on. That day, I learned something important about nature, how beautiful it is, but also how unpredictable and unforgiving. I had gone hiking to find peace and quiet, but instead, I came face to face with a reminder that the wilderness is home to creatures far bigger and more dangerous than me. The forest doesn't care about my plans or my safety. It simply is, and I am just a visitor passing through, lucky to walk away. The morning air was sharp and cold as I laced up my boots outside the trailhead. It was early fall, and the leaves were just starting to turn, a mix of deep reds, oranges, and yellows painting the forest. I had decided to hike a well-known trail that ran through a stretch of dense woods and rugged hills, a place I had visited once before but never alone. The plan was simple: a solo day hike, with enough supplies to last me through the afternoon before heading back. I started off with a steady pace, feeling the crunch of dried leaves beneath my boots. The path wound tightly between tall pines and thick underbrush, making the sunlight patchy and dim. The scent of damp earth mixed with pine resin filled the air. Birds called out occasionally, but otherwise the forest was quiet, too quiet almost. Around mid-morning, I reached a fork in the trail. One path continued along the map's marked route, while the other veered off sharply and was unmarked. Something about the second path caught my eye. It looked less traveled, the ground softer with moss and fallen leaves that hadn't been disturbed. I hesitated, but curiosity nudged me forward. I thought it might be a shortcut or a hidden loop that wasn't on the main map. At first, the trail was peaceful. The sunlight filtered softly through the branches, casting dancing shadows on the ground. I kept walking, the sound of my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of leaves. But as I moved deeper into the woods, the atmosphere shifted. The trees grew closer together, their branches twisting and blocking out more light. The air became cooler and damper, and the silence stretched longer between the occasional snap of a twig. After about an hour, I realized I hadn't seen any other hikers or signs of human activity. The trail markers I had been following disappeared altogether. My phone's GPS showed a weak signal, and the battery was starting to drop. I checked my compass, but the dense canopy made it difficult to see the sky clearly. I started to get a little uneasy. This wasn't the way I had planned to go. Then, something made me stop dead in my tracks. Up ahead, the trail seemed to end abruptly against a large, fallen tree. But behind the tree, I noticed fresh footprints in the mud, deep, wide, and uneven. They weren't like any animal tracks I'd seen before. The prints were too large and too irregular. They led away from the trail into a denser part of the forest. For a moment, I thought about turning back, but the thought of retracing my steps for an hour wasn't appealing. I decided to follow the tracks, thinking they might lead to another path or a clearing. I moved cautiously, stepping lightly, listening closely for any sounds. The footprints led me to a small clearing where the sunlight barely touched the ground. There, scattered around, were pieces of broken branches and disturbed dirt as if something large had been struggling or digging. I looked around carefully, heart pounding. There was no sign of other people or animals, just an eerie stillness that pressed against my skin like cold air. I decided I had seen enough. I turned to head back, but the forest suddenly felt different. The sounds I had taken for granted, the rustling leaves, the distant bird calls were gone. It was silent in a way that made my ears ring. The shadows deepened and moved oddly in the corner of my vision. As I hurried back toward where I thought the trail was, I realized I had lost it completely. The trees all looked the same, no clear path. My compass needle seemed to wobble, and my phone's GPS blinked out entirely. Panic started creeping in. I tried to calm myself, telling myself to stay steady and focus. I pulled out my map and tried to orient myself, but the details were too vague. My water was running low, and I felt the first sharp stab of hunger. The sun was dropping behind the trees faster than I noticed. The forest turned colder, the shadows stretching long and dark. Then I heard it, a low, guttural sound coming from behind a thick cluster of trees nearby. It wasn't a growl or an animal cry, but something deeper and heavier, like the sound of something breathing hard or moving slowly through the underbrush. My heart slammed in my chest as I froze. I knew I wasn't alone. I stayed still for a long moment, barely daring to breathe, listening as the sound shifted closer. Branches snapped lightly to my right, then to my left. The noise was getting nearer, deliberate, slow. I knew running was pointless. I had no idea which way to go. The instinct to survive took over. I grabbed a thick branch from the ground, holding it tightly as a makeshift weapon. I moved slowly, trying to keep the noise of my steps to a minimum, inching toward where I hoped the trailhead might be. After what felt like hours but was probably just minutes, I spotted a faint line in the trees that looked like a trail. Relief flooded me, and I picked up the pace, not daring to look back. The breathing sounds faded behind me, swallowed by the forest. I finally stumbled out of the woods just as the last light disappeared. The parking lot was empty, silent except for the hum of distant cars on the nearby highway. I sat down on the hood of my car, exhausted and shaking. I called for help but didn't want to stay there after dark. The next day, park rangers confirmed that the area where I had gone off trail was known for recent bear activity, and a few hikers had reported seeing signs of a large, aggressive bear near that section. The footprints I saw matched descriptions of bear tracks, but more distorted, likely from the wet ground and the bear's movement. The breathing sounds were probably the bear moving through the forest, tracking me or simply curious. I was lucky. I had stumbled out before the bear could get close enough to attack. The thick forest, the silence, and the feeling of being watched were all signs I had brushed up against something wild and dangerous. Not supernatural, but terrifyingly real. That day taught me that nature doesn't owe us safety, and even familiar trails can hide threats when we lose our way. From then on, I never ignored the maps, the markers, or the warnings. I never followed an unknown path just because it seemed interesting, because sometimes the most terrifying thing is not what you imagine, but what actually exists, waiting quietly in the shadows. The trail was supposed to be simple, a 6-mile loop through a national forest, one I had done a few times before in the daylight. This time, I planned to challenge myself, start late afternoon and finish as night settled in. I packed light, just a small backpack with water, a flashlight, some snacks, and a basic first aid kit. My boots were sturdy, and the weather was cool but clear. It felt like a perfect evening for a hike. I started at the trailhead just after 4 p.m. The sun was still warm on my back, and the forest was alive with sounds. Birds chirping, leaves rustling in the wind, and the faint hum of insects. The path was well worn, soft underfoot with layers of fallen leaves and pine needles. The trees were tall, thick trunks stretching toward the sky, branches forming a natural roof that filtered the sunlight. It was peaceful, and I felt the usual calm that comes with being deep in nature. The first 2 miles went by quickly. I kept a steady pace, enjoying the quiet and the smell of damp earth. Around the 3rd mile, the trail narrowed and dipped into a shallow valley. The trees here grew closer together, their roots twisting over the ground like veins. It felt cooler here, and the light dimmed as the sun lowered behind the hills. That's when I first noticed the feeling of being watched. It was subtle at first, a prickling at the back of my neck, a tightening in my chest. I told myself it was just my imagination, the kind of tension that comes when you're alone in the woods. Still, I slowed my pace and kept looking around, scanning the shadows between the trees. There was nothing there. I kept going, trying to shake the feeling. The path climbed again, winding up a ridge that gave a good view of the forest stretching out below. The light was fading fast, and I turned on my flashlight. Its beam cut through the darkening woods, landing on tree trunks, patches of moss, and the occasional squirrel darting away. The sounds of the forest had changed. Birds were quiet now, replaced by the distant call of owls and the rustle of small animals moving in the underbrush. About a mile from the ridge, I spotted something unusual. On the side of the trail, half hidden in the bushes, were footprints. They looked fresh, the edges sharp and clear in the dirt. But they weren't human. They were much larger, and the shape was strange. Long toes, thick pads, and deep claw marks at the front. I stopped and crouched to examine them more closely. The dirt around them was disturbed, as if something big had moved through recently. I felt a cold sweat break on my forehead. These prints weren't from any animal I knew. Deer, bears, even mountain lions didn't leave marks like these. I decided not to follow them. Instead, I stepped back onto the trail and moved faster, my heart pounding in my chest. The sun was gone now. The sky was a dark, deep blue with a sliver of moon barely lighting the way. I kept my flashlight on, but it felt weak against the thick darkness of the forest. Every step echoed loudly on the quiet trail. Then I heard it, the crack of a branch breaking somewhere off to my right. I froze. The beam of my flashlight swept over the trees but caught nothing. The sound came again, closer this time, and I could hear something heavy moving through the leaves. I broke into a run, the path beneath me slipping and turning as I hurried. The trees seemed to close in tighter, the darkness thick and suffocating. My breath came fast and loud in my ears. I didn't look back, but I could feel the presence behind me growing closer, something large and slow, moving with purpose. My foot caught on a root, and I fell hard, scraping my palms and knees on the dirt. Pain flared sharp, but I scrambled to my feet without hesitation. The sound behind me was almost on top of me now. I could hear heavy breathing, low grunts, and the crunch of leaves under heavy feet. I reached the top of the ridge and saw the trailhead lights in the distance. Relief surged through me. I pushed harder, my legs burning, ignoring the pain in my hands. The noises behind me slowed and then stopped. I didn't dare look back. Finally, I burst out of the trees and onto the dirt parking lot. The safety of the road, the cars, and the streetlights felt unreal after the suffocating darkness of the woods. I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys until I finally got the door open and slammed it shut behind me. The engine roared to life, and I backed out quickly, my eyes scanning the tree line as I drove away. The next day, I reported what I saw to the park rangers. They took my story seriously but told me there were no known animals in the area that matched the footprints. They suggested it might have been a bear or some large dog, but the footprints didn't fit. They said hikers had reported strange noises in the forest recently, but no one had been hurt. I went back to the trailhead a week later during the day, walking the same path. I found the footprints again, still sharp and clear in the dirt, as if no one had disturbed them since. I traced their path deeper into the woods, where the trail faded and the forest grew thick. It hit me then, whatever had been following me wasn't an animal. It was something else, something that lived just out of sight, moving quietly, waiting. The forest that once felt peaceful now seemed alive in a way that was cold and watching. I don't hike that trail anymore. I stick to places where I can see other people and where the light stays bright. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still hear that heavy breathing and the snap of a branch breaking in the dark. And I know it's still out there, waiting for the next person to walk the path. That night in the woods wasn't a ghost story or a fairy tale. It was real. The forest has its own dangers, not always clear or easy to explain. And sometimes, the scariest things aren't the ones you see, but the ones that follow quietly behind. The sun was low in the sky when I started the trail, the late afternoon light filtering through the tall pines and casting long shadows on the ground. The forest was dense and quiet, with only the crunch of my boots on the dry leaves and twigs beneath me. I was hiking alone, just me and my backpack, trying to clear my head after a rough week. The trail was supposed to be about 8 miles, winding up into a ridge that overlooked a small valley. I had my map, some water, and a headlamp just in case, but I figured I'd be back before dark. The first few miles were peaceful. The air smelled of pine and earth, and a soft breeze rustled the leaves above. I passed a few small clearings with patches of wildflowers, and a creek that gurgled quietly beside the path. It was the kind of place that made you feel small but calm at the same time. No worries, no noise, just nature doing its thing. As I climbed higher, the trail got steeper and rockier. My legs started to ache, and I had to stop a couple of times to catch my breath. I could feel the temperature dropping too. The sun was dipping behind the hills, and the forest was getting darker. I checked my watch, about 5:30 p.m. Still plenty of time, but I knew I had to keep moving. About halfway up, I reached a narrow part of the trail that ran along the side of a steep slope. The drop-off was sharp, with nothing but jagged rocks and a thick tangle of bushes far below. I stepped carefully, making sure my footing was solid. That's when I noticed the footprints in the dirt. Deep, heavy, and fresh. They were much bigger than mine, maybe even bigger than a man's. The prints led away from the trail and into the thick trees, disappearing quickly. I stopped and looked around. The forest was quiet again, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. My heart started to beat faster. I didn't know what had made those prints, but they felt wrong, too big, too close, too recent. I shook off the feeling and told myself it was probably just some animal, maybe a deer or a bear. I moved on, trying to keep my eyes on the trail, but I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made me tense up. The shadows grew longer, and the forest looked less inviting. I wished I'd started earlier in the day. About a mile later, the trail forked. The map showed the main path continuing left toward the ridge, but the right fork was marked as a shortcut that some hikers took. I didn't want to waste time, so I took the right path. It was narrower and less worn, with branches brushing against my shoulders and the ground littered with loose stones. The shortcut got steeper fast, and soon the trees closed in so tightly it felt like walking through a tunnel. The light was fading fast. I stopped to check my headlamp and turned it on, the beam cutting through the gloom. That's when I heard it. A low, heavy sound coming from somewhere nearby. At first, I thought it might be the wind, but it didn't move like wind. It was more like a deep growl or grunt, slow and deliberate. I froze and listened. The sound came again, closer this time, coming from deeper in the trees to my left. I tried to convince myself it was an animal. Maybe a bear or a large wild boar. I'd heard stories about bears in the area, but they usually avoided people. Still, the sound didn't feel natural. It was almost like something was watching me. I kept walking, trying not to make noise, but my heart was pounding so loud I was sure it could be heard. Then, something moved in the corner of my eye, a shadow shifting behind a tree. I swung my headlamp quickly in that direction, but there was nothing there. Just the dark trunks and underbrush. Panic started to build in my chest. I thought about turning back, but I wasn't sure which way to go. The trail was rough and confusing, and without clear daylight, it was hard to tell the way. Suddenly, I stumbled on a root and fell forward hard onto my hands and knees. The pain shot through my palms and knees, but worse was the noise I made. Whatever was nearby stopped its sound. I sat up slowly and looked around. The forest was silent again. I forced myself to stand and started moving as fast as I could without falling again. The trees seemed to close in tighter, the underbrush scratching at my clothes. My legs burned with the effort. I wanted to shout for help, but I knew no one would hear me out here. After what felt like forever, I reached a small clearing. Moonlight was breaking through the trees, shining on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley below. I stopped to catch my breath and looked around. No movement, no sounds except my ragged breathing and the night insects. That's when I saw it. Another set of footprints, bigger than the first, leading away from the clearing toward the ridge. But these prints were deeper, and there were signs of struggle on the ground. Broken branches, scuffed earth, and what looked like dried blood smeared on a rock. My stomach turned. Whatever had made those prints had been here recently and hadn't left peacefully. I knew then I had to get out. Fast. I turned back the way I came, trying to remember the trail. My headlamp flickered as my battery died, and I was plunged into darkness. I pulled out my phone for light, but there was no signal. The glow was weak, barely lighting the path ahead. I walked faster, stepping over roots and rocks, trying not to trip again. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound made me jump. My mind raced through worst-case scenarios. Getting lost, injured, attacked. Hours passed. The forest never ended. I thought I might never find the way back. My legs cramped and my water was gone. I felt cold and tired, and the fear never left. Finally, just before dawn, I stumbled onto a wider path, and in the distance, I could see the faint glow of car headlights. I followed it until I reached a dirt road, then a parking lot where a couple of early hikers were setting off. I was safe. Later, I reported the footprints and the signs of struggle to the park rangers. They told me there had been several reports of poachers in the area, illegally hunting and sometimes violent. The fresh footprints I saw were likely theirs. They used the thick forest to hide and trap animals, and sometimes people who crossed their path. The police increased patrols, and the area was closed for weeks. I learned that the forest isn't just a place of peace. It can hide dangers that don't belong to any fairy tale. The real horror is people, not ghosts. And sometimes the scariest thing is knowing that out there, in the dark, there are people willing to hurt to get what they want. From that day on, I never hiked alone or without telling someone exactly where I was going. The forest had shown me its dark side, and I wasn't eager to find it again. I set out early that morning, my backpack heavy but packed with everything I thought I'd need for a day hike in the mountains. The sky was clear, the air cold but fresh, and the trail was quiet except for the crunch of my boots on the dried leaves scattered over the dirt path. I didn't expect anything unusual. I had hiked here before many times, and the forest always felt safe, familiar even. But that day, something was different. At first, I noticed small things, the kind that might go unnoticed if you weren't paying close attention. The trail markers seemed fewer than usual, almost faded into the bark of the trees. Some signs were missing altogether. The path I was following curved sharply, and I could swear it didn't look like the maps I had studied. But I told myself I must have taken a less-used side trail by accident. I was used to that. Sometimes the GPS signal gets spotty in the mountains. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. The usual sounds of birds chirping or the rustle of small animals in the bushes were gone. Even the wind felt still, like the forest was holding its breath. I kept walking, pushing the nagging feeling aside, thinking maybe I just hadn't reached the more lively part of the trail yet. After about an hour, I reached a small clearing. The sunlight filtered down through the thick canopy, casting long shadows over the rocks and moss. It was beautiful, almost peaceful. I took a break, sitting on a fallen log, opening my water bottle, and sipping slowly while scanning the trees around me. But then I noticed something strange. The footprints. They were fresh, deep in the mud near the edge of the clearing, bigger than mine, and not the kind left by deer or other animals. These were human footprints. I studied them for a moment, heart starting to beat faster. They were too large to be mine or any normal hiker's. Something about them felt off. I looked around but saw no one. No campsites, no backpacks, no sign of anyone else. Just those footprints leading deeper into the woods. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach but forced myself to stand up. I decided to follow the footprints, curiosity mixed with a growing unease. The trail narrowed, the trees growing thicker, blocking out most of the sunlight. The air felt heavier. My steps slowed. Every now and then, I heard a faint snap of a twig or a rustle in the underbrush. I stopped, looking around sharply, but saw nothing. Still, the feeling of being watched pressed down on me like a weight. The footprints led to a part of the forest I had never seen before. The ground was uneven, littered with broken branches and rocks. I had to be careful with every step. I noticed some strange marks on the trees, like deep scratches, but not from animals. These were sharp, jagged, as if made by something big and angry. My heart hammered in my chest. I kept going, telling myself to stay calm. Maybe someone was injured or lost. Maybe it was just a hunter's tracks. But the deeper I went, the more isolated I felt. The trees around me looked twisted, with thick roots breaking the surface like grasping hands. Shadows stretched long and dark even though it was still midday. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me. It wasn't loud, just a low, shuffling sound, like someone moving slowly through the brush. I froze. My breath caught. The noise stopped. I turned quickly but saw only trees and empty space. I called out silently in my mind, telling myself there was no one there, but I could still feel it, the eyes watching, waiting. I decided to turn back, retracing my steps as fast as I could without running and risking injury. But the forest had changed. The trail markers I had seen before were gone. The path was no longer clear. I stumbled over roots and rocks, trying to find the way back to the clearing, but it felt like I was walking in circles. Every tree looked the same. Every shadow seemed to hide something. Panic began to creep in. My heart raced. I stopped and pulled out my phone, hoping to check the GPS. The screen was dead. No signal, no power. I cursed myself for not charging it fully. The silence around me was suffocating. No birds, no wind, no sounds except my own heavy breathing. I pressed forward, determined to find the main trail again. After what felt like an hour but could have been much longer, I saw a flicker of light through the trees. Relief flooded me. I pushed through the last few bushes and stumbled into a small clearing. But it wasn't the same one I had rested at before. This was darker, smaller, and there was something else there. I saw a makeshift camp, an old tarp stretched between two trees, some rusted cans, and what looked like a fire pit cold and filled with ashes. Near it, something caught my eye. On the ground, scattered across the dirt, were more footprints. These were the same large, strange prints from before, but here they circled in a pattern, as if someone had been pacing, waiting. I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't want to stay here. I didn't want to know who or what had been here before me. I turned quickly to leave, but then I heard it again. That low shuffling sound. Closer this time, not far behind me. My heart slammed against my ribs as I ran blindly through the trees, dodging branches and falling over roots. I didn't look back. After what seemed like forever, I burst out of the dense forest onto a wide trail I recognized. I could see the parking lot and a few cars in the distance. Relief overwhelmed me. I didn't stop running until I was inside my car, locking the doors, hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I sat there for a long time trying to steady my breathing. The sun was starting to set, and I knew I couldn't go back into those woods. Not until I knew what was really out there. Later, I told the park rangers about what I had found. The strange footprints, the hidden camp, the eerie silence. They exchanged worried looks. They said sometimes in remote areas people disappear, hikers, campers who never come out. Sometimes those places become the territory of desperate people living off the grid, or worse. They advised me never to go back alone, to always tell someone where I was going, and to trust my instincts, because sometimes the forest doesn't want you there. That day changed how I see those mountains. The peaceful trails I once loved now seem like a maze of shadows, hiding stories I hope never to uncover again. The footprints, the quiet, the feeling of being watched. It all stayed with me, a reminder that some places are dangerous, not because of ghosts or monsters, but because of real threats we can't always see coming. And the forest? Still out there, waiting. The morning air was cool and fresh as I set off on the trail, the forest around me waking up with the soft sounds of birds and rustling leaves. It was one of those perfect early autumn days where the sunlight filtered through the tall trees in golden beams, casting long shadows across the ground. I had planned this hike for weeks, a solo trip to clear my head and escape the noise of the city. The trail was supposed to be peaceful, well-marked, and nothing more than a simple walk through nature. The first few hours passed without incident. The path wound gently through dense woods, the earth soft beneath my boots and the smell of pine thick in the air. I crossed small streams on fallen logs and stopped briefly at a clearing to drink water and eat some snacks from my pack. I felt good, steady on my feet, confident. I didn't see another person all morning, but as I climbed higher, the forest began to change. The trees grew older and thicker, their branches weaving into a tight canopy that blocked much of the sunlight. The trail narrowed and twisted, slipping between moss-covered rocks and fallen branches. The air turned cooler, damper. There was something different here, something quieter, heavier. The usual sounds of birdsong and insects faded until the only noise was the crunch of my boots on the forest floor. I noticed the trail markers were less frequent now, sometimes fading into the moss or partially hidden by overgrown plants. Still, I trusted my map and my instincts, convinced I could find my way. I kept going, climbing steep slopes where my legs burned and my breath came in short gasps. After a while, I started to feel the weight of isolation. The trees seemed to close in tighter around me, and the shadows deepened. I glanced at my watch. I had been hiking for nearly 5 hours now. Time slipped strangely out of sync here. The sun hung low, but the thick branches made it impossible to tell how much light was left. Then, without warning, the trail disappeared. One moment I was stepping carefully over a cluster of roots. The next, the path was gone, swallowed by thick underbrush and fallen leaves. I scanned the area, heart pounding. No sign of the beaten path, no markers, nothing familiar. Just dense forest stretching in every direction. I pulled out my compass and map, trying to reorient myself. The compass needle swung erratically for a moment before settling. I moved slowly, trying to find the trail again, but everything looked the same. Tall trees, thick bushes, uneven ground. I took a deep breath and told myself to stay calm. I had prepared for this. I had extra water, food, a flashlight, a whistle. I kept moving in what I thought was the right direction. Step by step, I pushed through the branches, each footfall crunching in the dry leaves. But soon the feeling of being watched crept over me. I stopped and listened. No wind, no animals. Just silence, the kind of silence that presses on your skin and makes your ears ring. I shook it off and pressed on. The forest started to change again. The ground became rockier, the trees thinner and twisted. I found a small stream and followed it, hoping it would lead to a road or campsite. Hours passed. The sky darkened. My legs ached, and my backpack felt like a stone dragging me down. I tried to keep track of how far I had walked, but the uniformity of the landscape made it impossible. The stream curved and forked, and soon I wasn't sure if I was moving closer to safety or deeper into the woods. That night, I set up a small camp under a thick tree. I built a fire with trembling hands and ate some cold food. The forest felt alive in a way I hadn't expected. Shadows flickered beyond the firelight, and strange noises echoed in the distance. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, low growls that might have been animals or something else. I stayed awake most of the night, listening. The fire burned low, and my mind raced with worst-case scenarios. I kept the flashlight close, ready to shine it if needed. Every sound seemed louder, every shadow more threatening. By dawn, I forced myself to get up and pack. I had to find a way out. I followed the stream again, this time in the opposite direction. Hours dragged by with no clear sign of civilization. My water was almost gone, and my energy was fading fast. Then something caught my eye. A piece of torn fabric caught on a bush. It looked like part of a jacket. Not mine. My heart hammered. I scanned the area carefully and found more signs. Footprints in the soft mud, broken branches at waist height, deep scratches on a tree trunk. Someone else had been here recently. I tried calling out, but my voice sounded weak and swallowed by the forest. No answer came. I felt a cold knot of fear twist in my stomach. I moved faster, following the footprints, hoping they led to a trail or a campsite. But they ended abruptly near a steep ravine covered in thick brush. No way down, no path forward. I sat down for a moment, breath heavy and heart pounding. Panic began to rise. What if whoever had left those signs was still nearby? What if they weren't friendly? The thought made my skin crawl. I realized then that I needed to make a choice. Stay put and wait for help, or try to find another way out on my own. The fire in my pack could last a bit longer, but my phone had no signal, and I had no idea how far the nearest road was. I decided to climb higher to get a better view. I scrambled up a ridge careful of loose rocks and thorny bushes. When I reached the top, the forest stretched endlessly in every direction. A sea of green broken only by a narrow ribbon of road far off in the distance. Relief surged through me. I had a direction. I rested a moment, gathering my strength. Then I began the long descent, pushing myself harder than ever. The way down was brutal. Slippery rocks, thick undergrowth, and the constant fear of slipping and falling. I fell twice, scraping my hands and knees, but kept moving. After what felt like hours, the trees thinned, and I finally reached the edge of the forest. The road was there, just as I had seen from the ridge. I stumbled onto it, waving my arms frantically as a car approached. The driver stopped, eyes wide, and helped me into the vehicle. I was exhausted, dehydrated, and shaken to my core. When I finally told them what had happened, they nodded grimly. "You're lucky to be alive," they said. "Not many people get lost out there and make it back." In the end, the experience left me with a lasting respect for how quickly nature can turn from beautiful to unforgiving. No ghosts, no monsters, just the raw, harsh reality of being lost, alone, and facing the limits of your own strength and will. That hike wasn't just a walk in the woods. It was a test, and I passed it, but only barely. From then on, I never took the trail for granted, always prepared for the worst, because sometimes the scariest thing isn't what you see. It's what you don't see, and what might be just beyond the trees watching. I set out early that morning, the sky just starting to lighten with the first touch of dawn. The trail was supposed to be easy, a popular route winding through the hills near the edge of town. I had packed light, just a day pack with water, some snacks, a map, and a small first aid kit. The air was cool and fresh, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. Everything felt normal, perfect even. At first, the hike was peaceful. The trail was clear, marked well, and I passed a few other hikers who smiled and nodded as they went by. Birds chirped overhead, and sunlight filtered through the trees in soft, warm beams. The ground was firm beneath my boots, the kind of steady footing that gave me confidence. I felt good, strong even. The kind of feeling that makes you think nothing bad could ever happen. The trail started to climb steeply after the first hour. I took my time, stopping every now and then to catch my breath and take a drink. The views were opening up, with patches of blue sky visible through the branches and distant hills rolling away in the distance. I was about halfway up the slope when I noticed something strange. The usual sounds of the forest, the birds, the rustling leaves, the occasional snap of a twig, had all but stopped. It was like someone had muted the forest. A heavy silence pressed down, unnatural and sharp. At first, I thought maybe the wind had died or the birds had flown away. But there was no wind. The air was still and thick. I stopped and looked around, trying to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. My heart was beating a little faster now. The quiet was too complete. As I kept moving, the trail became less obvious. The well-worn path started to narrow, overgrown with brambles and thorny bushes. I could see my footprints behind me, but ahead, the trail looked like it was fading into the underbrush. The map in my hand confirmed this part was supposed to be clear, but nature was reclaiming the route. That made me uneasy. I didn't like the idea of losing my way. I pressed on, trying to follow the faint markings on the trees that indicated the trail. My boots scraped against rocks and dry leaves. The branches reached out at me like fingers, catching my sleeves and scratching my face. I felt exposed and vulnerable in a way I hadn't before. Suddenly, I heard a distant noise, a low, heavy crunching sound coming from the woods to my right. It was slow and deliberate, like something large moving through thick brush. My breath caught. I froze. The noise stopped abruptly. Nothing else. No birds. No wind. Just silence again. I considered turning back. The thought of being lost in these woods without clear trails was terrifying. But I told myself I just needed to keep going for a little longer, to find the ridge where the trail was supposed to open up again. The ridge was the turning point, the place where I'd rest and decide if I wanted to continue or head back. Minutes later, I reached a small clearing. The sky was open above me now, and I could see far across the valley below. The view was stunning, but my mind was too tense to enjoy it. I scanned the edges of the clearing, the shadows between the trees, and then I saw it. Something large and dark, partially hidden behind a tree. It didn't move, but the shape was unmistakable. It was a bear, and it was watching me. I tried to stay calm. Bears usually avoid people, and I knew I shouldn't run or make sudden moves. I slowly reached into my pack for the bear spray I always carried but rarely thought I'd need. My hands trembled as I unscrewed the cap. The bear didn't come closer but stayed still, eyes locked on me. My heart was pounding, sweat dripping down my back. I didn't dare take my eyes off it. Slowly, I turned and began backing away, keeping the bear in sight. The ground was uneven, and I stumbled once or twice, but I kept moving. The bear's head followed me, but it didn't charge. I reached a thicker part of the forest and ducked behind a large tree. My breath was ragged, but the bear was still there, just watching. I realized I had lost the trail completely. The trees looked unfamiliar, and I couldn't see any markers. Panic started to rise. I knew what I had to do. I stayed low, quiet, and tried to move slowly in the opposite direction of the bear. The forest was dense, and it was easy to get turned around. The sun was already dropping lower behind the hills, and shadows stretched longer. Hours passed. I had no idea which way to go. My water was nearly gone. My legs ached. The bear had disappeared at some point, but the fear stayed with me. Every small noise, a twig snapping, a rustle in the leaves, made me jump. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I spotted a faint trail marker on a tree. Relief flooded me. I followed the markers carefully, step by step, until the path became clear again. The forest opened up to a familiar dirt road, the one I had started from that morning. I didn't stop to rest. I moved fast, driven by the memory of the bear and the fear of being lost again. When I reached my car, the relief was overwhelming. I was safe. Later, I learned that the bear was part of a new group that had recently moved into the area because their old habitat was destroyed by logging. The park rangers had warned hikers to be careful and carry bear spray. I realized how close I had come to something dangerous and how easily things could have gone wrong if I had panicked or made the wrong move. That day changed how I saw the outdoors. Nature isn't just beautiful. It's wild and unpredictable. Even the most familiar paths can hide danger if you're not ready. I'm still drawn to the hills, but now I respect them more. I check my gear carefully, I pay attention to the signs, and I never underestimate how quickly things can turn serious. Because in the end, the forest doesn't care about you, it only reacts to what you do. And sometimes, survival is just about staying calm, moving slow, and knowing when to turn back. The morning air was crisp, the kind of fresh cold that makes your lungs feel sharp and awake. I had planned this hike for weeks, choosing a trail in a remote forest area known for its natural beauty and quiet solitude. It was the perfect escape from the city noise and the pressure of everyday life. The trail was supposed to be about 15 miles round trip, starting from a small dirt parking lot on the edge of nowhere, winding through thick woods, rocky ridges, and open meadows. I set off early, my boots crunching over dried leaves and small twigs scattered on the path. The trees stood tall and close, their branches weaving a canopy that let through patches of sunlight. Birds chirped in the distance, and the occasional rustle of small animals moved through the underbrush. I carried a heavy backpack loaded with water, snacks, a map, compass, and a small first aid kit. My phone had little signal out here, but I made sure to download offline maps just in case. At first, the hike was exactly as I expected. The trail was clear, marked by faded signs nailed to trees every few hundred feet. I paused a few times to catch my breath, drink water, and take in the quiet beauty. The deeper I went, the denser the forest grew. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. Every now and then, I noticed broken branches or flattened grass to the side of the trail, probably deer or other wildlife moving through. Around noon, I reached a small creek that crossed the trail. The water was cold and clear, tumbling over rocks. I stopped to refill my water bottle and splash some on my face. That's when I noticed something strange. Footprints in the mud by the water's edge. They looked fresh, too big and deep to be from any small animal. I frowned, glancing around. The forest felt quieter now, like the usual sounds had dropped away. No birds, no rustling, just silence. I decided to keep moving, figuring someone else might be hiking this trail. The footprints continued for a while alongside the trail, then disappeared. I checked my watch. I had plenty of time to finish the hike and get back before dark. Still, a little unease settled in my stomach. The trail soon climbed sharply, winding up a ridge. The trees thinned out, and I could see the forest stretching below in all directions. It was beautiful but also exposed. The wind picked up, chilling me even through my jacket. I pulled the hood over my head and moved faster. As I rounded the ridge, the path became less clear. The markers were old and faded, some missing entirely. I checked my map and compass carefully. The trail was supposed to curve left, heading down toward a small campsite near a lake. I thought I heard something behind me, a low snap of a branch, but when I looked back, nothing was there. I kept going, but now I was more alert, my eyes scanning the trees and bushes. The silence was heavy, almost unnatural. My heartbeat quickened. Then I heard it again, a distant rustling, like something big moving through the undergrowth, but not in the direction I had come from. It was deeper in the woods, somewhere ahead but off the trail. I stopped, breathing hard, gripping my trekking pole tight. The sound grew louder, crunching leaves and snapping twigs. It was too heavy to be a deer or smaller animal. My mind raced. What could it be? A bear? A wild boar? Neither was common here, but not impossible. I decided not to wait and started moving faster toward the campsite. The trees were denser again, shadows stretching long in the late afternoon light. The trail was harder to follow, but I kept my focus on the map and compass. Then I heard the noise again, closer this time. My skin prickled, and I broke into a light jog. My legs burned, but I pushed on. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shifted. I stumbled and fell forward onto loose gravel near the edge of a small clearing. I looked up and saw a pair of eyes staring back from the shadows across the clearing. They were not human eyes, too large, too reflective. I froze, heart pounding in my ears. The creature didn't move at first. I couldn't make out its full shape, but it was huge and low to the ground. Then it started to step forward slowly. I scrambled back on my hands and knees, trying to stay quiet, not looking away. The eyes followed me, unblinking. I remembered the bear spray in my pack. I reached for it slowly with one hand, ready to spray if it charged. The creature let out a low growl, more of a warning than an attack, and then turned and disappeared back into the trees. I stayed still for a long moment, every nerve on edge. I got up carefully and decided to take a different route, heading back the way I came, even though it would take longer. The forest seemed even darker now, and the trail was almost lost beneath leaves and fallen branches. The footsteps I had seen earlier no longer appeared, but the fear stayed with me. The sun sank lower, casting long shadows through the trees. I kept glancing behind me, expecting to see those glowing eyes again. Every noise, an owl hoot, a squirrel scampering, made me jump. I didn't stop until the parking lot came into view, the place where I had left my car. When I finally stepped out of the forest, the relief was overwhelming. I locked the car doors and sat inside, heart still racing. I knew what I had seen wasn't a ghost or some fairy tale creature. It was real, something wild and dangerous, probably a large predator that had been tracking the trail or defending its territory. I reported the sighting to the local ranger station the next day. They confirmed that there had been recent reports of a large cougar spotted in that forest. They warned hikers to be cautious and avoid the area until the animal was captured or moved on. That day, I learned something important about nature, how beautiful it is, but also how unpredictable and unforgiving. I had gone hiking to find peace and quiet, but instead, I came face to face with a reminder that the wilderness is home to creatures far bigger and more dangerous than me. The forest doesn't care about my plans or my safety. It simply is, and I am just a visitor passing through, lucky to walk away. I had planned the hike weeks before I actually went. I wanted something quiet, something away from the usual trails where people walked with music in their ears and loud voices that ruined the feeling of being in the wild. I picked a section of a long mountain trail that most people skipped because it was steep and rough, but the map showed a small open spot halfway up the ridge where I could rest. The place looked peaceful on the screen, almost harmless, and that made it feel even more inviting. I packed light but packed carefully, knowing that the fewer things I carried, the better I would move on uneven ground. I started the hike early in the morning when the sun was still low and the cold air stung a little. The trail began with soft soil and scattered rocks, so the first part felt almost too easy. I walked with a steady pace, listening to the small sounds around me. The rustling of dry leaves, the sharp snapping of twigs under my boots, the distant hum of insects. Every little detail felt louder because I was alone, and it made the forest feel more alive. I liked that feeling, at least in the beginning. As I moved higher, the air got thinner and the path grew rougher. Large roots curled across the dirt like thick ropes forced above the surface, making my steps slow and careful. I didn't see any human tracks, not even old ones. The ground felt untouched, and that made me believe I had picked the right place. I kept climbing until the trees thinned a little and the wind got colder. My breath felt heavier, but I pushed through it, wanting to reach that open spot before the afternoon. Halfway up the ridge, I noticed the forest changing. The ground looked disturbed, like something had dragged across it recently. At first, it didn't concern me. Animals move things around all the time. But then I saw long streaks in the dirt that looked too straight and too heavy to be from something small. My brain tried to brush it off, telling me that maybe rain had washed it that way or maybe a fallen branch had rolled downhill. I forced myself not to stop. The more I stared at it, the more strange it felt. The higher I climbed, the quieter the forest became. No birds, no insects, nothing except the wind moving slowly through the branches. The silence felt thick, and every time I stepped on something dry, the sound echoed too loudly, almost unnatural. It made me feel like something was listening, not watching, but listening carefully to each movement. I tightened the straps of my backpack and kept walking, but the uneasy feeling followed me. When I reached the open spot I had seen on the map, I felt a small relief. The ground was mostly flat, covered with dry grass and small stones. The view over the lower forest was wide and beautiful, stretching farther than I expected. I took a few deep breaths, trying to shake the uncomfortable feeling that had been sticking to me for the last hour. My legs felt tired, so I sat on a large rock and drank some water. For a moment, everything felt normal again. Then I saw it. Off to the far side of the open area, where the grass grew a little higher, something was pressed down in a long, uneven shape. At first I thought it was just where animals had slept or moved through, but when I walked towards it, I realized the grass wasn't just pressed down. It was torn. Something had dragged across it with enough force to rip the blades clean from the soil. The torn area stretched into the trees, disappearing into the shadows. It looked like a trail of struggle, not movement. My stomach tightened. I didn't want to imagine anything violent happening there, but the ground left little room for other explanations. I stepped back slowly, feeling the cold wind push against my back like a warning. I decided I would rest for only a few more minutes before heading back down. The place no longer felt peaceful, and the silence around me felt heavier than before. The forest felt like it was holding its breath. I stood up to leave, and that was when I heard it. A faint rustling deeper in the trees, soft but heavy enough to stand out in the silence. It wasn't the light movement of a small animal. It sounded larger, slow, deliberate. My chest tightened as I realized it was coming closer. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear branches shifting and dry leaves being crushed under weight. The sound didn't match the rhythm of something running or wandering. It sounded like something following a path, the same torn trail I had seen. My instincts told me to move. I tightened the straps of my bag without looking away from the trees and began walking back down the mountain. I kept my steps slow at first because sudden movement felt like it would make noise that didn't belong in that silent forest. But the rustling didn't fade. It followed, staying deep in the trees but matching my pace. My breathing got faster, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Every time my boot touched the ground, the thing in the woods seemed to step after me. Eventually, fear pushed me past carefulness, and I picked up speed. My steps got louder, but I didn't care anymore. The sound behind me grew stronger, like it was coming closer. I didn't dare turn my head. The trail felt longer than before, like the forest was stretching around me, trying to slow me down. My legs burned as I forced myself forward, stumbling over rocks and roots, grabbing at trees to keep from falling. I could hear it even clearer now. Heavy steps, slow but strong, sometimes stopping, sometimes starting again. It felt like it was keeping a certain distance, as if it didn't need to rush. Like it knew I wasn't familiar with the land, and it was. My heart hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears. When I finally reached the lower part of the trail, the sounds faded. Not suddenly, but gradually, as if whatever was following me had decided not to leave the upper ridge. I kept moving until the trees opened up into the area near the start of the trail. Only then did I let myself stop. My hands were shaking, and my throat felt dry even though I had barely breathed through my mouth. I turned back to look at the forest, half expecting something to appear between the trees, but nothing came. I walked back to my car with my legs still trembling. Even inside the car, with the doors locked, the fear stayed in my chest like a cold stone. As I drove away, I kept checking the rearview mirror, even though I knew nothing would be there. When I got home, I sat for a long time thinking about what had happened. I didn't tell anyone because I knew how it would sound. People would think I imagined it, that the silence and isolation got into my head. But I knew how real it felt. I knew what heavy steps sounded like. I knew something had followed me down that ridge, something that wasn't lost, something that moved with purpose. I never went back to that trail. Every time I think about hiking again, I picture that torn grass, that long dragged mark on the ground, and the quiet, heavy footsteps that matched my every move. I learned that the forest has places where humans don't belong, places that look calm but hide things that don't need to be seen. And I realized that the scariest things in the wild aren't ghosts or strange creatures. The scariest things are real, silent, and alive. And sometimes they follow you without ever showing themselves. I started that hike because I needed a break from everything. I picked a random trail far from the usual tourist spots, somewhere deep in the hills where the air felt cleaner and the noise of the world died before it reached your ears. I didn't think much about the place before going. It looked quiet on the map, a long loop that cut through a forest, crossed a few ridges, and circled back near a river. It seemed perfect for clearing my head. I had no idea how different the place would feel once I stepped onto the path, and how quickly the quiet could turn into something that made my skin crawl. The first hour felt normal. The air was cold in a way that woke me up slowly, and the trees on both sides leaned over the trail like they were trying to hide it from the sky. The ground was soft with old leaves, and every time my boots pressed down, they made that dry crunch that echoed for a few seconds before fading. I liked that sound at first. It reminded me I was alone, but after some time, the feeling of being alone shifted into something heavier. It started with the sense that the forest was too still. No birds, no insects, nothing moving except the branches swaying high above me. Even the wind felt weak, like it didn't want to push through the trees. The deeper I went, the more the air changed. It became thicker, almost damp, with a smell like wet earth that had been turned over and not allowed to dry. I noticed footprints ahead of me at one point, but they were soft and stretched out like someone had walked through mud. I didn't see any mud around, so the prints confused me. They looked recent, but the trail leading up to them had been dry. I stepped around them, not wanting to disturb them, but even while I continued, my mind kept circling back to them. The size looked normal, but the shape felt wrong. The front part dragged slightly, like whoever made them was sliding their foot forward instead of lifting it. I told myself it could have been someone tired or maybe someone carrying a heavy bag. But the thought didn't settle. About 2 hours into the hike, the trail narrowed and went uphill, the slope getting steeper with each step. My breathing grew heavier, and sweat formed under my backpack straps. I wiped my forehead often, but the air seemed to cling to my skin and trap the heat. I took a break beside a fallen tree, setting my backpack down and stretching my legs. While I stood there, I had the sense that something was off behind me. I didn't hear anything, but the feeling hit me suddenly, like a weight dropping onto my shoulders. I slowly turned around, expecting to see another hiker or maybe an animal, but the trail behind me was empty, completely still. Not even a branch moved. What bothered me wasn't what I saw. It was what I didn't hear. My footsteps had echoed earlier, but when I listened now, the forest swallowed every sound I made, even my breathing. I picked up my backpack and kept walking, trying to shake off the discomfort, but the more steps I took, the stronger the feeling grew. It felt like someone was matching my pace but keeping their distance, always just out of sight. When I reached a long ridge that opened to one side, I stopped again. The drop down the slope was sharp and covered in thick ferns. I could barely see between them, but I noticed areas where the leaves were pushed down, like something big had moved through them. I scanned the slope, trying to see if maybe a deer or something had made the trail, but there were no animal prints, no broken branches, no sound at all. Just those strange flat patches where something had pressed through the ferns. I didn't like standing still anymore, so I picked up my pace. My boots hit the ground faster, and every few minutes I glanced over my shoulder without turning my whole body, trying to catch something moving. I never saw movement, but I started noticing tiny details I had missed before, like a broken twig that looked split cleanly, as if someone had stepped on it minutes before I got there, or dirt that looked freshly disturbed, or small rocks that seemed pushed to one side of the trail, not randomly but almost lined up in the direction I was walking. I reached the halfway point of the loop where the trail should have turned left and slowly descended toward the river. The path was there, but something else caught my attention before I took a step down. In the dirt at the beginning of the descent, I saw another set of footprints, the same dragged ones I had seen earlier. But this time they were pointed uphill toward me, not down the trail, up toward where I was standing. I froze. Those prints hadn't been there earlier. I would have stepped right on them. The only explanation was that someone had come up behind me without making a sound and then stopped at the point where the footprints ended. That bothered me more than anything else I had seen so far. Someone had been close enough for me to hear them, but I didn't. Not once. I didn't want to stay there another second. I hurried down the slope, almost jogging. The trail got rougher, with loose rocks and sharp turns, but I didn't slow down. I felt the presence again, stronger this time, like someone was walking just a few steps behind me, copying every move I made. The worst part was that the feeling stayed even when I reached the flatter part near the river. By then my legs were shaking from rushing downhill, but I kept going. I couldn't shake the sense of someone watching me, following my steps, waiting for me to stop. When I reached the river, the air felt slightly cooler, but it didn't calm me. I kept going along the bank, following the trail that led back to the start. I kept my eyes forward, not daring to look back now. The presence felt closer, so close it felt like my neck tightened on its own. I forced myself to breathe slowly so I wouldn't panic, and I kept walking even when the trees thinned out and the trail became wider. Only when I heard distant road noise did the feeling suddenly lift. It didn't fade. It didn't slowly go away. It vanished instantly, like whatever had been following me stopped right at the edge of the forest. I didn't turn around to see. I walked straight to my car, opened the door with shaking hands, and sat there for a few minutes before I could even start the engine. When I finally drove away, I looked once into the rearview mirror. The entrance of the trail stood between the trees like a dark opening. Nothing moved in it, but the stillness looked wrong in a way I felt deep in my chest. I don't know who or what followed me that day, but I know it was real. I know it stayed behind me the entire time. And I know one thing for sure, whatever was in that forest didn't want to be seen. It only wanted me to know it was there. And that is why I never went hiking alone again. I didn't need to see anything to understand the danger. Feeling it was enough. I started the hike late in the afternoon, thinking it would be a simple loop trail through a valley I had never explored before. I wanted something random, something I hadn't planned or overthought, just a walk in a place I didn't know. The map at the trailhead looked simple, and the air felt calm and cool in a way that made me think nothing could possibly go wrong. I packed light, carried just enough water, some snacks, and a small flashlight I almost left behind because I didn't think I would be out long enough to use it. I remember how normal everything felt at the start, how my footsteps sounded steady on the dirt, how the smell of pine made the whole place feel safe. The trail began wide, then slowly narrowed as I continued deeper into the valley. The trees grew taller and blocked more of the sky, making the path dim even though the sun was still up. I liked the feeling at first. It felt like stepping away from the noise of the world. The ground was soft from old needles, and the wind moved through the branches so quietly that I barely noticed it. For a long time, nothing felt strange. But as I kept going, the silence grew heavier. I didn't hear any birds. I didn't hear insects. Even my footsteps sounded softer, like the earth was swallowing every sound. I kept moving because nothing seemed wrong enough to turn back, but I felt this slow and steady pressure in my chest that I couldn't explain. It wasn't fear yet, just a feeling that something was off. After an hour, the trail split in two directions. The wooden sign that had once marked the directions was broken, lying on the ground with nothing written on the piece that remained. I stood there for a moment, trying to guess which way matched the map I had glanced at earlier, but the truth was that I didn't remember it well enough. Both paths looked nearly the same, but the one on the right seemed a little more worn, so I chose that one without thinking too hard. At first the new path looked normal, but after a few minutes I noticed something strange. There were footprints in the dirt, but they were old and scattered, and they didn't look like they were following the trail. They crossed over it in random directions, almost like someone had been wandering through the trees without knowing where they were going. Some of the prints looked deep, like the person had been running. Others dragged in a way that made me slow down and stare at them longer than I wanted to. I told myself they were probably old, maybe from someone who got lost and then found their way out. But the longer I looked, the more it felt like the person who made them didn't leave in a normal way. The air grew colder even though the sun was still up. The trail narrowed until branches brushed my shoulders on both sides. I kept looking behind me even though I knew I wouldn't see anything. The pressure in my chest grew heavier, and I felt something sharp under it, something like a warning that came too slow. Then I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, like metal mixed with earth. As I walked farther, it grew stronger, like rust and old water and something rotting under leaves. I slowed down but didn't stop. The smell got worse with every step until I finally saw something lying ahead in the dirt. It was an old camping backpack, torn open and covered in dirt. The straps were ripped. The fabric was shredded like it had been dragged. The things inside were scattered around. An empty bottle, a sock, a notebook soaked with mud. The smell seemed to be coming from it, but I knew there had to be more nearby because the stink was too strong. My stomach twisted as I stepped around the bag and saw the ground beside it. The dirt was disturbed, pushed around like something heavy had been dragged through it. The drag marks led into the trees away from the trail. That was the moment when the pressure in my chest finally became fear. Not the kind that makes you scream or run without thinking, but the slow, cold kind that makes your hands shake in a way you try to hide from yourself. I felt exposed. I felt like eyes were somewhere in the trees, watching me stand there alone. I turned back the way I came, but after only a few minutes I realized something was terribly wrong. The trail didn't look the same. The trees looked closer together, and the ground felt uneven, like the earth had shifted. I didn't remember stepping over certain roots or ducking under certain branches. I kept walking anyway because I didn't have another choice, but every minute I felt more certain that I was no longer on the same path. The smell followed me. I didn't know how it could follow me, but I smelled it behind me, then beside me, then ahead of me. It drifted in the air like something moving around me without making a sound. I kept my eyes straight ahead because I knew that if I turned too fast or looked too long at something, I might see something I didn't want to see. My heartbeat felt loud in my ears. My breathing felt sharp and quick. The trees pressed closer and closer, and I walked faster even though I knew it wasn't helping. When the sun finally dipped low enough for the forest to turn dark, I pulled out the small flashlight. The beam was weak and narrow, barely lighting a few feet in front of me. The moment it turned on, the smell grew sharper again, and the beam hit something in the bushes to my right. I didn't walk closer, but I didn't have to. Hanging on a low branch was a piece of torn fabric, stained dark and stiff. It looked like part of the missing backpack, or maybe clothing. I didn't stare at it long enough to know. I kept moving and didn't stop again. My mind felt like it was locked on the single need to get out, to find anything familiar. The forest felt wrong in every direction, like the paths had changed after I entered. The drag marks, the smell, the torn bag, they all kept replaying in my head as I pushed through branches and stumbled over roots I couldn't see. At one point I felt the ground change under my feet, softer and wetter, almost like mud mixed with something thicker. I didn't look down. I didn't want to know what it was. Then, after what felt like hours, I saw a thin slice of pale sky between the trees. I pushed toward it with everything I had left. The forest slowly opened again, the air warming with every step. When I saw the dirt parking lot through the last row of trees, my legs almost gave out. My car was still there. Everything looked normal outside the tree line, as if nothing had ever happened inside it. I didn't look back when I reached the car. I didn't try to understand what happened. I just locked the doors, started the engine, and drove until the forest was far behind me and the smell finally left my nose. The ending became clear to me only later, after I had time to think. Whatever happened in that valley wasn't about ghosts or anything unreal. Someone had been out there. Someone had dragged something heavy through the trees. Someone had torn that backpack open. Someone had left those footprints running in all directions. And that same someone had never left the forest. They were still in there when I walked through it. They were probably near me the whole time, moving silently, watching from places where the trees pressed close together. I wasn't supposed to walk down that right-hand path. I wasn't supposed to find what I found. And I know for a fact that if I hadn't turned around when I did, if I hadn't walked just a little bit faster in those last minutes, I would have ended up like the person who left the backpack behind, someone who entered the valley and never walked back out. I started that hike because I felt like I needed a quiet place to clear my head. I had been working too much, sitting inside too much, and I wanted to feel real air again. I chose a random mountain trail far from the city, a place I had never been before, somewhere deep in a national forest. I liked the idea of being surrounded by tall trees and cold wind and nothing else. I parked my car on a small gravel pull-off beside the entrance of the trail. The sky was bright but had a thin layer of clouds that made everything look slightly washed out. The air felt a little damp when I stepped out, and there was a faint smell of soil and pine needles. The forest looked peaceful at first glance, almost soft, like it wanted me to walk into it. I tightened the straps on my backpack and started walking. The trail was narrow, with loose dirt and scattered stones that rolled under my shoes. Every few steps I heard the crunch of old branches. The trees were tall and packed close together, and their branches blocked most of the sky. The deeper I went, the darker it became, even though the sun was still high. I liked the quiet at first. It felt calm, like the world had softened. About an hour in, I noticed something strange. It wasn't anything big, just a small shift in the air. The forest felt heavier. The smell of pine faded and was replaced by a damp, rotting scent. I slowed down and looked around, but everything looked the same. The trees were thick and dark, and the ground was covered in old leaves and moss. Nothing looked dangerous, but something felt wrong deep in my gut. I kept going anyway. I told myself it was just me overthinking. I had been stressed out for weeks, so maybe my mind was playing tricks. But after another 10 minutes, I realized I hadn't heard a single bird since entering that part of the forest. No wind, no insects, nothing. It felt like the world around me had been muffled. Then I saw the first sign that the trail wasn't as empty as I thought. It was a torn piece of fabric stuck on a low branch. It looked old, maybe from a jacket. It was dirty and stiff, like it had been out there for a long time. I paused and stared at it, trying to guess how it got there, but I forced myself to keep moving. The trail grew steeper. My legs started to burn, and I could feel sweat gathering on my back. The smell of damp soil became stronger. My breathing sounded too loud in the silence, and that made me feel even more exposed. The trees here grew in odd shapes, with twisted trunks and low branches that forced me to duck under them. After another stretch of hiking, I found the second sign. It was a footprint on a patch of soft mud beside the trail. It wasn't mine. It was deeper, slightly larger, and the toes pointed in the same direction I was heading. The mud was still wet on top, meaning the print was fresh. I stared at it for a long moment, and a cold feeling settled in my stomach. Someone else had been there very recently, walking the same path. I looked around again. The forest looked empty, but the silence felt heavier. I told myself the footprint belonged to another hiker, but the idea didn't calm me the way it should have. Something about it felt wrong. Maybe it was because the print didn't look steady. It looked like whoever left it had stepped hard, as if they were rushing or running. I almost turned around right there, but I kept going. I don't know why. Maybe stubbornness, maybe stupidity. I just didn't want to admit that I felt scared. The trail curved sharply around a cluster of large rocks, and the moment I stepped past them, I froze. There was a backpack lying in the dirt beside the trail. It was torn open, with some of its contents spilled on the ground. An empty water bottle, a crushed energy bar wrapper, a sock smeared with dirt. It looked like it had been ripped or grabbed, not opened normally. The straps were frayed, and the fabric was sliced in uneven lines. I felt my heartbeat speed up. I looked around again, slow and careful, moving only my eyes. The trees behind me seemed darker now. I didn't hear anything, but I felt something. Pressure, like I was being watched from deep between the trunks. My legs didn't want to move, but I forced them to. I kept walking faster this time. My breath grew short. My hands felt cold even though my body was sweating. Every few steps I looked behind me, expecting to see someone standing there, but the trail stayed empty. The forest got steeper again, and the trees thinned out just enough for a pale light to come through. I stepped onto a wider section of trail that sloped along the side of the mountain. The ground dropped sharply to my right, falling into a long stretch of dense, dark woods. That's when I heard the first real sound. It was the snap of a branch somewhere behind me. I stopped instantly. My chest tightened. I didn't hear footsteps, but the sound had been real. It hadn't come from the wind or from an animal moving lightly. It had been solid, like weight had shifted on wood. I didn't turn around. I just started walking faster, almost jogging. My heartbeat filled my ears. I kept my eyes forward, watching the trail twist and climb. The air felt colder, and the rotting smell grew stronger. I could feel panic rising, crawling up my spine. Then I heard another sound. A low, quick rustle, like someone brushing past leaves. This time I turned. There was no one on the trail, but something moved deeper in the trees. Something pale between the trunks, something quick. I saw only a flash before it vanished. My whole body filled with a cold, electric fear. I didn't walk after that. I ran. My shoes slid on loose stones, and I almost lost my balance several times. But I didn't stop. Branches slapped my arms. The air tore at my lungs. The trail looked endless in front of me. All I could think about was getting back to the main path, back to the parking spot, back to anything that wasn't this silent forest. I didn't dare look back again, but I heard the sounds behind me. Soft steps at first, then faster ones. Leaves crushing. Something moving quickly but trying not to make noise. That terrified me even more. Someone who didn't want to be heard. My legs burned, but I pushed harder. I ran until my vision blurred. When I reached the last steep section, I nearly collapsed, but I kept going. The moment I saw the first glimpse of the parking lot through the trees, my body filled with pure relief. I sprinted across the gravel, reached my car, yanked the door open, and threw myself inside. My hands shook so badly I could barely fit the key into the ignition. When the engine finally started, I reversed so fast that the wheels spat gravel behind me. I didn't look back as I drove away. I only stopped when I reached the highway miles later. My hands still shook on the steering wheel. My shirt was soaked with sweat, and my throat felt raw. I sat there for a long time, staring ahead, trying to calm down, trying to understand what had happened. I couldn't explain the torn backpack, the fresh footprint, the strange movement in the trees, or the feeling of being followed. But I knew what I felt, and it wasn't imagination. Someone had been in that forest with me. Someone who didn't want to be seen. Someone who had watched me long enough to step closer when I was deep enough in the trail that nobody else would pass by. I never went back to that place again. I deleted the location from my phone, and I avoided any trails in that part of the state. Even now, when I think about that day, I feel the same cold weight in my stomach. Not because of what I saw, but because of what I didn't see. Because of the quiet footsteps behind me. Because of the torn pack and the fresh print. Because of the way the forest felt alive with something that had nothing to do with nature. The ending was simple but clear. If I had hesitated for one more minute, if I had stopped in the wrong part of the trail, I don't think I would have made it back to my car. Whatever was moving behind me knew those woods better than I did, moved faster than I did, and stayed just far enough out of sight to keep me from understanding who or what they were. I escaped because I ran. That was the only reason. And every time I think about it, I know I won't get that lucky again if I ever choose another random trail without thinking. There are some places where being alone is the worst mistake you can make, and now I understand that in a way I will never forget. I started the hike late in the afternoon, which was my first mistake. I told myself the air felt cooler and the light would stay long enough. But the truth was that I just wanted to get away from everything and walk until my legs felt heavy. I picked a random trail in the mountains, one I had never tried before, thinking the unknown might clear my head. The entrance looked normal, just a narrow dirt path slipping into thick trees, with a wooden sign leaning to one side and old footprints scattered in the dust. Nothing about it felt dangerous at first. It felt quiet, almost too quiet, like the trees were listening. As soon as I stepped deeper into the woods, the air changed. It carried a cold smell, like wet rock and old leaves that had been crushed for years. I kept walking, listening to the sound of my boots pressing into soft ground. The slope rose slowly, then steeper, making my legs burn a little. I liked that feeling. It made me think less. Branches scratched at my sleeves, and small bugs flew close to my face, drawn to the sweat on my skin. The light filtering through the trees grew weaker as clouds gathered above the canopy, turning everything into a grayish green. I kept my eyes on the trail, noticing small things. Broken twigs, a half-eaten pine cone, fresh scratches on a tree trunk like something had dragged claws across the bark. I tried not to think about that. After an hour or so, the trail narrowed until it almost disappeared. It became a thin strip between tall rocks and thick bushes. My backpack brushed branches constantly, pulling at me, but I pushed forward, wanting to see where it led. The air felt heavier the higher I climbed. I could hear distant rushing water, maybe a stream or a small waterfall, which made me believe the trail still had a proper end. I let that idea push me forward. About halfway up the ridge, I saw the first sign that something was wrong. A torn piece of faded fabric hung on a low branch, ripped like someone had caught their clothing while running. It fluttered in a tiny breeze that I didn't feel anywhere else. I touched it with 2 fingers. It felt dry and stiff, like it had been there for days but not long enough to fade into the forest. I looked around, but the woods were silent. No birds, no rustling, nothing. Just the constant beat of my own breath. I kept moving, slower now, paying attention to the ground. The ground changed too. The soft dirt turned patchy and scattered with loose stones, making my boots slide now and then. I saw footprints in the dirt, fresh ones. Too fresh. They were uneven, like the person who made them was limping or moving fast. They went in the same direction I was heading. My chest tightened a little, but I told myself it was just another hiker. Maybe someone who took the trail earlier in the day and had trouble with their leg. I kept following the path, even though I felt something inside me telling me I should turn back. The forest grew darker, even though the sun shouldn't have been setting yet. Thick branches knitted together over my head, blocking most of the sky. The sounds changed too. I started hearing faint cracks in the distance, soft but sharp enough to catch my attention. Not branches breaking in the wind, more like weight shifting on dry wood. I stopped walking several times, listening, but every time I paused, the woods fell quiet again. So I kept climbing, feeling the slope under my feet pull harder with every step. Near the top of the ridge, the footprints became messy, scattered, almost panicked. Dirt was pushed aside in uneven streaks. Stones were knocked out of place. I followed the trail until I reached a small clearing carved among the trees. The ground there looked disturbed, like someone had fallen or struggled. My stomach twisted when I saw the second piece of fabric lying on the dirt. This one was torn at the edge and smeared with dried mud. The clearing felt wrong. Something about the air felt tight, like the space had trapped an old moment inside it. I stood there, trying to steady my breathing, when I heard a sound behind me. Not loud, not sharp, just a slow, heavy step somewhere deeper in the trees. Then another. The weight of it made the ground crunch in a way an animal wouldn't. I didn't turn around right away. I just listened as the steps moved slightly to the side, as if someone or something was trying to circle me quietly. I felt pressure build in the back of my neck, the kind that forces you to move even when you don't want to. I turned my head slowly, feeling every muscle tighten. There was nothing visible, just thick trees and shadows. But I could sense movement, like something was blending into the environment, hiding between trunks, watching. I didn't wait to see more. I backed out of the clearing and moved down the trail as fast as my legs allowed. I didn't run at first, I didn't want to trip, but my pace grew quicker with every step. The forest didn't stay quiet this time. I heard branches shifting behind me, dry leaves shaking, footsteps growing faster as if matching my speed. Soon I was half running, half sliding down the rocky path. My breathing turned rough, and sweat dripped down my back. I didn't look behind me. I didn't need to. I could feel the presence right behind the trees, staying just out of sight but close enough that every snap of a branch made my heart jump. The trail felt much longer going down, like the woods were stretching around me, trying to keep me in. My boots hit loose stones and I nearly fell twice. Each time I caught myself, the sounds behind me grew louder, as if whatever followed me had picked up its pace. When I finally reached the lower part of the trail, the air changed again. Felt lighter, less tight. I could see a hint of open space through the trees, the place where the trail began. I pushed myself harder, lungs burning, legs shaking. The footsteps behind me slowed, almost like they knew I was reaching safety. But they didn't stop. They followed until the very edge of the tree line. Only when I stepped out into open ground did the sound cut off completely, like someone had flipped a switch. I didn't stop walking until I reached my car. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me 3 tries to get the key into the lock. When I finally sat inside, I looked back at the trail entrance. The trees stood still, calm, as if nothing had been there at all. but I knew something had been. Something real. Something that didn't want to be seen but didn't want me there either. I drove away without looking back again. When I got home that night, I searched for information about people disappearing on that trail. I found a few articles, old ones, all with the same vague words about hikers who went missing near the ridge, hikers who were never found. Reading those stories made my skin crawl because I knew what I had heard in those woods wasn't imagination or fear. I avoided hiking for months after that. Even now, when I think about it, the memory feels sharp. The forest wasn't haunted. There were no ghosts. What followed me was real. Something or someone that lives deep in those trees, moving silently until you get too close. I was lucky to walk away that day. I know that clearly now, and I know I will never take a random trail again, no matter how badly I want to escape my thoughts. The woods remember the people who never came back, and I almost became one of them. I started the hike early in the morning because I wanted to finish the long trail before it got dark. I picked this place randomly on a map the night before, thinking it looked simple and quiet, just a long path through thick forest along a ridge and down toward a small river. I packed light, carried only what I needed, and told myself it would be an easy day. The air felt cold when I stepped out of the car, and the kind of silence around me felt heavy, like the whole place was waiting for something. I did not think much of it at first. I just started walking. The first hour felt normal. The trail was a narrow line of dirt squeezed between tall trees. The ground was soft in some places and firm in others, and the smell of wet leaves followed me the entire time. I remember thinking that the forest looked untouched, like no one had walked through here for a long time. Even the signs near the parking spot looked old and faded, and the trail markers were spaced out in strange ways, sometimes too close together, sometimes so far apart that I had to stop to make sure I was still going the right way. As I kept walking, the path climbed gently. The higher I went, the quieter it became. There were no bird sounds, no insects buzzing, no wind pushing through the trees. It felt like the entire forest was holding its breath. Every time I stepped on something crunchy, the sound felt too loud. I kept looking behind me even though I knew no one else was there. It was just a strange feeling, nothing more, but it kept growing inside me. After a while, I reached a sharp turn in the trail. On the ground, there were deep marks in the dirt, like something heavy had been dragged across. At first I thought it might have been from fallen branches, but the marks were too clean and too straight. They ran across the path and went down the hill into the trees, where the light looked darker. I stood there for a long moment, staring at them. Something about those drag marks made me feel uneasy. They looked fresh. The dirt around them was still loose, like whatever made them had passed through recently. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it could be from workers or some equipment, even though I hadn't seen any signs of maintenance anywhere. I kept walking, but every step after that felt heavier. The trail began to narrow until it barely had space for my feet. The trees around me felt closer, the branches hanging lower, some of them brushing my shoulders as I pushed through. It was like the forest was slowly closing in. I noticed more strange things on the ground. Broken branches that looked snapped by force, not by weather. Patches of disturbed soil, and once, a torn piece of fabric hanging from a low branch, moving slightly even though there was no wind. My breathing started to get faster, not because of the climb but because something felt wrong. I didn't know what, but I kept scanning the sides of the trail, expecting something to move. More than once, I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but every time I stopped, the sound stopped too. It felt like someone was matching my pace, staying just far enough out of sight. I tried to calm myself by thinking it was the forest playing tricks on my mind. But the longer it continued, the more sure I became that I was not alone on that trail. About 4 hours into the hike, the sun was already hidden behind heavy clouds. The dim light made everything look flat and colorless. Then I saw something ahead of me that made my stomach tighten. On the side of the trail, there was a small clearing, and in the middle of it, there was a backpack. It looked dirty and worn, with one side ripped open. The way it sat on the ground didn't look like someone had placed it there. It looked like it had been thrown or dropped. I approached it slowly, looking around first, but the forest stayed still. The bag smelled faintly like damp clothes and sweat. Inside, there were a few items scattered: a crushed water bottle, an empty energy bar wrapper, a sock, and a map. When I pulled the map open, I saw something that made all the hairs on my arms rise. Someone had circled part of the trail I was on, and written one word next to it in shaky handwriting: "Don't." I dropped the map and stepped back. My chest was tight now, and my hands felt cold even though I was sweating. I didn't know whether to turn back or keep going forward, but the idea of walking back down the trail with whatever had been following me behind my back felt worse. I decided to keep going. I moved faster now, almost jogging at times, listening to every sound, trying to keep my steps quiet. The forest felt different ahead, darker, thicker, like the trees were leaning in and blocking more of the sky. As I continued, the ground changed too. It became uneven, covered with deep prints that didn't look like normal footprints. They were wide and oddly shaped, like someone had walked while dragging one side of their body. Some prints overlapped, showing that whatever made them had walked this same trail more than once. I tried not to look at them too closely, but they were everywhere on both sides of the path, some fresh, some older. The feeling that something was behind me kept getting stronger. At one point, I heard a sudden, sharp crack of a branch snapping somewhere close. I froze. My heart felt like it was beating against my throat. I didn't turn around. I just forced my legs to start moving again. Faster this time. Every sound around me felt clearer. Rustling leaves, shifting dirt, something heavy pressing on the ground. It all felt too close. The trail eventually started sloping downward, and I could hear water in the distance. That meant the river was close. The thought of reaching open space made me push myself even harder. My legs burned, and my shoulders ached, but I didn't stop. I kept imagining something reaching out from behind, grabbing me, pulling me into the trees. The fear pushed me faster than I thought I could move. When I finally reached the riverbank, I felt a sudden rush of relief. The open space made me feel like I could breathe again. I followed the river upstream because I remembered seeing on the map that there was an old service road near the water. If I could find it, I could get out faster than going back the way I came. The river path was rough, full of loose rocks and slippery mud, but I kept going. After about 30 minutes, I saw the road. It was an old gravel road with weeds growing through the cracks, but it was clear enough to walk on. I turned onto it and kept moving until I finally reached a gate and a dirt turnaround where my car should have been hours earlier. The moment I saw my car sitting alone in the fading daylight, I felt something inside me loosen. I got inside, locked the doors, and didn't stop driving until I reached a main highway. Only when I checked the rearview mirror one last time did I notice something that made my hands shake again. On the back window, smeared into the thin layer of dust, there was a long mark. A drag mark, fresh, as if something had touched the car before I got in. I didn't go back to that trail. I didn't report anything. All I know is that whatever was in those woods was real, it was watching me, and it got close enough to touch the car I escaped in. I still think about the backpack, the map, and the strange marks, and I realize how close I was to ending up like whoever left them behind. And now I know why the trail felt so empty. People didn't hike there anymore. Something else did. I started the hike before sunrise, hoping to cover most of the trail while the air was still cool. I didn't choose any special route. I just parked beside an empty gravel pull-off near the base of the ridge and followed a narrow dirt path that cut between tall pines. I had no real goal except to clear my head for a few hours. I didn't check maps, I didn't look up the area, and I didn't expect anything except a long walk through quiet woods. At first, the trail felt normal. The air smelled like damp leaves and old wood. The ground was cold but firm, and every time my boots pressed into the soil, I heard that deep, soft thud that always made me feel calmer. I kept a steady pace uphill, letting the trees slowly close around me. The forest was thick but not suffocating, and the light filtered through the branches in broken stripes that kept shifting as the sun climbed. After about an hour, the trail narrowed so much that the branches on both sides brushed my jacket. The air felt heavier there, like it wasn't moving at all. I kept going anyway, telling myself it was just a more overgrown part of the path. The map in my head told me the ridgeline wasn't far, and I wanted to reach it before I stopped for a break. The first strange thing I noticed was the silence. Not the usual forest quiet. This was deeper, like someone had thrown a thick blanket over the world. No wind, no insects, not even the distant sound of a bird. It made every step I took feel too loud, like I was the only thing alive in that entire section of woods. I tried to ignore it, but the quiet started crawling under my skin. The more steps I took, the more I felt like something was changing around me. The trees seemed closer together. The air felt warmer even though the sunlight still had the pale morning color. And something about the smell was off. It smelled like metal and wet soil, the kind of smell that reminded me of rusted tools left out in the rain. When the trail curved left, I saw it. A single boot print in a patch of soft dirt off to the side. It wasn't mine. It was deep, like someone had stepped there recently with a lot of weight. The edges were sharp, untouched by wind or falling leaves. I stopped and stared at it for a few seconds, trying to think of a normal explanation. Maybe another hiker, maybe a hunter, but the print pointed in a direction that wasn't the trail. Pointed straight into a thick wall of brush. I kept walking, telling myself not to get worked up. But about 2 minutes later, I saw another print, then another, each one fresh. Each one slightly off the trail, like someone was walking parallel to me but never actually stepping onto the path. I slowed down because I started noticing another detail. The prints were getting closer to the trail. They started about 5 or 6 feet away, then 4, then 3. By the time I saw the 6th one, it was right at the edge of the path, as if whoever was making them was slowly closing in on me. My chest tightened. I didn't want to turn around because that made it feel too real, like I was admitting something was there with me. So I kept looking straight ahead, walking faster, trying to tell myself it was all in my head. Or maybe someone had walked the trail at the same time earlier in the morning. But the prints looked too perfect, too fresh. And I never heard anything. No branches snapping. No leaves shifting. Nothing to match the weight needed to make marks like that. A few minutes later, I finally turned around. Couldn't help it. I needed to see if anything was behind me. But the trail was empty, long and straight, and nothing moved. I didn't see any prints behind me on the actual path. My breathing got faster, and it felt like the air was getting harder to pull in. I decided to keep moving, but with more purpose. I wasn't running, but I was walking faster than I usually would on a hike. My shoulders felt tight, and I kept looking at the ground ahead of me. That's when I noticed the prints were now on the path. Not behind me, in front of me, fresh ones, dead center of the trail, pointed the same direction I was walking. I froze so hard that my legs shook. The prints hadn't been there a minute ago. They couldn't have been. They were too sharp, too clean. There was no way someone walked ahead of me without making a sound. There was no way they passed me on that narrow trail. I didn't know what else to do except keep going. Turning back felt just as bad as going forward, like I was choosing between two unknowns. I stayed in the center of the path, moving slowly now, trying not to make too much noise. Every print I saw made my stomach flip because they kept appearing, always the same shape, always pointed forward, always looking like they had been made seconds before I reached them. I kept expecting to see someone up ahead. Maybe a hiker, maybe someone who lived in the area. But the trail stayed empty. No movement, no sound. Just those prints pulling me deeper into the woods like they were leading me somewhere. When I finally reached the ridge line, the trail opened up a little. There was a clearing with a wide slope on one side and thick trees on the other. The moment I stepped into that clearing, the prints stopped. Just ended. No sign of turning. No sign of stepping into the grass. No sign of continuing forward. The last print was right in the middle of the clearing, like whoever made it simply disappeared after taking that one step. I stood there for a long time, breathing hard, looking in every direction. The quiet felt even heavier there, almost pressing against my ears. My skin felt hot, and every part of me was telling me not to stay. I turned around and started back down the trail, moving fast. I didn't care what was behind me or ahead of me. I just wanted to reach my car. Going downhill felt 10 times longer than going up. The trees looked different. The air felt thicker, and the silence stayed with me the entire way. I kept checking the ground, terrified I'd see prints again. But the trail stayed clean all the way down. When I reached the gravel pull-off, I almost collapsed from how hard my body was shaking. I sat in the car for a while before starting the engine, trying to calm myself. The moment I pulled onto the road, the forest behind me looked normal again. Still and quiet in the harmless way, not the heavy, suffocating way I felt inside it. I don't know who or what made those prints. I don't have any explanation I can give myself. But I know what I saw was real. I know they appeared one after another, always fresh, always following the path I was on. And I know that they stopped only when I stepped into that clearing, as if whoever was making them didn't need to go any farther. I haven't gone back to that ridge since that day, and I won't, because the forest didn't feel empty. It felt like someone else was there, walking ahead of me, always just out of sight, always staying silent, and always leading me somewhere I was never meant to reach. I set out early that morning, the cold air biting at my skin as I tightened the straps on my backpack. The trail was supposed to be an easy one, a simple day hike through a quiet stretch of forest I had never explored before. The map showed a loop about 8 miles long, winding through tall pines and across shallow streams. I had been looking forward to the solitude, the chance to escape the noise of the city for a few hours and just be alone with nature. The first few miles were peaceful. The ground was soft with fallen needles, and the trees stood tall like silent sentinels. The sun filtered through the branches, casting patchy light on the trail. Every so often, a bird called somewhere high above, or a squirrel rustled through the underbrush. I moved steadily, the rhythm of my boots on the dirt steady and comforting. I felt good, light, calm, like nothing could touch me out here. Around mid-morning, the trail began to climb. The trees grew closer together, their trunks darker and thicker. The air smelled sharper, colder even, like it had been compressed by the height. I was breathing heavier now, sweat soaking my shirt despite the chill. The silence deepened, too. It wasn't just quiet. It was a kind of waiting silence, like the forest was holding its breath. I shrugged off the feeling and kept going. At about the 4-mile mark, I stopped to rest beside a small creek that cut across the path. The water was clear and cold, bubbling over smooth stones. I took off my pack and knelt down to drink and splash water on my face. The sound of the creek was soothing, breaking the quiet in a natural way. After a few minutes, I packed up and headed on. The trail curved steeply up the side of a ridge, and the trees thinned out. From here, I could see the tops of the forest stretching out like a green sea. The sky was a clean blue, but clouds were gathering low on the horizon. A distant rumble of thunder rolled through the air. I didn't think much of it at first. Summer storms were common here, but I made a mental note to move faster. As I climbed, the trail became rocky and uneven. My boots slipped on loose gravel, and I had to catch myself against a tree. The wind had picked up, pushing cold gusts through the branches and biting at my skin. I zipped my jacket all the way up and quickened my pace. The sky darkened more, and the thunder grew louder, rolling like distant cannons. Suddenly, the first fat drops of rain began to fall. They hit my face cold and hard. I pulled out my rain jacket and put it on, but the storm was coming fast. Within minutes, it was pouring. The trail turned slick and muddy, and visibility dropped as sheets of rain blurred the trees and rocks. I knew I had to find shelter or at least get off the ridge quickly. The last thing I wanted was to be caught out here during a lightning storm. I glanced around but saw no sign of a safe spot nearby. No caves, no overhangs, nothing but thin trees shaking in the wind. My heart sped up, and I tried to remember the map in my head, where the path led next. I forced myself to keep moving, stepping carefully to avoid slipping. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something strange. At first, it looked like a figure standing just off the trail between two trees. It was dark and unmoving. My heart jumped, but when I blinked, it was gone. Maybe a trick of the light or the rain. I told myself not to be stupid. It was just the forest playing tricks. I moved faster, The trail bent sharply downward now, cutting through thick bushes and tangled roots. My boots sank deep into mud, and I slipped twice. The storm was relentless, and my clothes were soaked through. My fingers were numb, and my legs felt heavy. I kept pushing forward, telling myself the parking lot and my car were just ahead. Then the strangest thing happened. The trail, which had been clear on the map, seemed to disappear. The path was swallowed by a thicket of bushes and fallen branches, and I realized I was standing in the middle of nowhere. I spun around, looking for the last marker or any sign of the trail, but there was nothing, just endless trees and dark undergrowth. Panic started to creep in. I checked my phone for GPS, but there was no signal, no way to call for help. I was alone in the storm, lost somewhere in this forest with no idea where to go. I tried to calm down, reminding myself I had a compass in my pack. I pulled it out and oriented myself toward where I thought the trail should be. I started moving, pushing through wet bushes and grabbing onto tree trunks to steady myself. The rain hammered down, soaking me to the bone. As I walked, I heard something else. Not the wind or the rain, but a soft crunching sound behind me. Branches snapping under heavy footsteps. I froze and looked back, but the rain blurred my vision. Nothing. Then again, the sound came, closer this time. Something was following me. I forced myself to keep moving, trying not to panic. The forest was thick, and the storm made everything worse. My legs ached, and my breaths came out in ragged gasps. The crunching footsteps kept pace behind me, never stopping. Then I tripped over a root and fell hard onto the muddy ground. My hands scraped and stung, and I scrambled back up, heart pounding. The footsteps were closer now, too close. I stopped and spun around, trying to see through the rain. A figure emerged from the trees, barely visible, large and moving fast. I couldn't make out a face, just the shape. A man maybe, dressed in dark clothes soaked through like me. I didn't wait. I ran, stumbling down the slope as fast as I could, pushing through branches and leaping over rocks. The footsteps behind me followed without hesitation. My mind screamed for me to get out of here, but every direction looked the same, endless trees and shadows. After what felt like hours, the storm began to ease. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and the sky started to lighten. I was exhausted, soaked, and my legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand. I risked looking back again, no sign of the figure. I kept going, hoping to find the trail or some sign of civilization. Then suddenly, just ahead, I saw the trail marker nailed to a tree, partially covered in moss. Relief flooded through me. I was back on the path. I followed it quickly, moving downhill until finally, through the thinning trees, I saw the parking lot. My car was there, lights off and untouched. I ran to it, fumbled with the keys in my numb fingers, and locked the doors behind me. Sitting inside, warm and dry at last, I tried to make sense of what had happened. I was sure I had been followed, but by who or what, I couldn't say. There was no sign of anyone else on the trail. No footprints in the mud. Just the strange feeling of being watched and chased through the storm. I didn't report it. I knew how it would sound. A lone hiker chased by some shadow in the woods. Maybe a wild animal, maybe a desperate person hiding out in the forest. Whatever it was real and it was close. And I was lucky to get away. From that day on, I never took a trail alone, and I always checked my gear twice. The forest can seem peaceful and empty, but sometimes it hides something darker. Not ghosts or monsters, just real danger waiting where you least expect it. And sometimes that danger is right behind you, just out of sight. I hiked alone because it made me feel like my mind could breathe. That was the only reason I picked that random trail that morning. I didn't plan anything. I just looked at the map, saw a long route through a forested ridge I had never tried before, and decided to go. The air felt cold when I stepped out of my car, and the sky looked pale and empty. I liked that. It made everything feel quieter. The trail started off simple. Just dry leaves, soft dirt, a few thin streams cutting across the ground. I could hear nothing but my footsteps and the wind slipping through the branches. As I walked deeper, the trees grew tighter around me, almost like the forest didn't want to let sunlight in. Still, I felt okay. I liked being surrounded by nature. I liked the feeling of being away from everything. After about an hour, the trail started climbing. The slope grew steeper, and the air smelled like wet soil. My legs burned a little, but I pushed on. I stopped to drink water and looked around. I didn't see anything strange, but something felt different in the air. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't movement. It was just a slow, heavy feeling crawling up my back, like something was shifting deeper in the forest, something I couldn't see. I kept going, trying to ignore it. The trail got narrow, winding between tall rocks and thick roots. Every step felt heavier. I started noticing things that made me uneasy, little things that I normally wouldn't care about. A broken branch hanging too low. A patch of disturbed soil like something had dragged across it. A tree with fresh scratches that looked too straight and too clean. I told myself they were normal, but the feeling in my stomach didn't agree. Not long after, I realized I hadn't heard any birds for a while. No insects, no rustling, nothing. The forest had gone completely still. That silence felt wrong, like the woods were holding their breath. I walked slower without meaning to. Every few steps, I looked behind me, but there was nothing. Just the empty trail stretching back into the trees. At one point, the path forked even though the map never showed a fork there. The left trail looked beaten and smooth, the kind people clearly used. The right trail looked fresh, as if the ground had been cleared recently. No footprints, no signs of use. Just dirt, almost too clean. I felt a strange pull toward that fresh path, like something inside me wanted to see where it went. I don't know why. It didn't make sense. But I stepped onto it anyway. The deeper I went, the stranger everything became. The trees changed shape subtly. They seemed taller, thinner, spaced in a way that felt deliberate. The air smelled sharper, like metal. The ground had patches where the soil looked darker, as if it had been soaked by something that didn't belong. My steps echoed too clearly, like the forest was hollow underneath. Then I saw the first sign something was very wrong. It was a shoe print. A single boot print pressed into the dirt, but the heel was deeper than the front. That only happens when someone is running downhill or stumbling backward, and the print wasn't old. It looked like it had been made maybe an hour before. I crouched down, staring at it, trying to make sense of the shape. As I looked, I noticed tiny drag marks beside it, like someone had tried to hold onto the ground while being pulled back. I stood up, heart pounding. I should have turned around right there, but I kept walking because some part of me needed to know what had happened. The trail dipped downward into a narrow ravine filled with dense bushes. I stepped carefully, and the moment I entered the ravine, the temperature dropped. It felt like walking into a cold basement. I could feel the chill on my face, on my arms, even through my clothes. Ahead of me, branches were snapped clean. Not broken by animals, broken by force. Some bushes were flattened, pressed into the dirt like someone had fallen or been pushed into them. I walked slowly, watching every shadow. My breathing sounded too loud in my ears. At the end of the ravine, the trail widened into a small clearing. And that's where I found it. A backpack. It lay half open, dirt smeared across it. A water bottle was crushed nearby, and one of the straps was torn like someone yanked it hard. I felt a deep, sick feeling in my chest. The ground around the bag told a story just from the patterns in the soil. Someone had struggled here. Someone had fallen, rolled, pushed away, maybe tried to run. I saw scattered footprints, all facing different directions, all dug deep like someone fought to get free. But there was no sign of the person. I stood there for a long moment, frozen, listening to the dead quiet around me. I felt like the forest was watching me, waiting for me to make the wrong move. My instincts finally kicked in, telling me to get out. I turned around and started walking fast, then faster, then almost running. Every step felt like something was behind me even though I didn't hear anything. The forest felt heavier than before, like it was closing the distance between us. When I got back to the fork, the fresh trail looked darker, like the shadows there had thickened. I didn't look at it again. I took the main trail and walked as fast as I could without breaking into a full sprint. My back felt exposed the whole time. The trees looked different. The silence didn't fade. It followed me all the way down. By the time I reached my car, the sky had grown dim. I didn't realize how long I had been up there. My hands shook as I unlocked the door. I kept looking at the tree line, expecting something to move. Nothing did, but the feeling didn't go away. When I drove off, the last thing I saw in my mirror was the entrance to that trail, standing completely still, as if nothing had ever happened. I didn't report the backpack. I should have, but I was scared that if I tried to explain what I saw or what I felt, they would think I imagined it. I know I didn't. Someone disappeared in those woods and something caused it. Something real. Not a creature, not a spirit, not anything supernatural. Something made of flesh and strength and silence. Something that knows how to move without sound. Something that watches before it acts. I don't hike alone anymore, and I never pick random trails. Because somewhere out there, far from the marked paths, there is a place where a backpack lies open in the dirt, and the forest around it still feels like it's waiting for someone else to wander in. I started the hike early in the morning, thinking it would be a simple day on a random trail I had never tried before. It was one of those long forest routes that didn't get many visitors, the type that showed up online only because someone once walked it and recorded the path. I wanted quiet, and the place looked empty enough to give me that. The air felt cold and clean when I stepped out of my car, and the trees around me stood tall and dark, still holding the weight of the night. The trail marker was worn down, almost unreadable, but the path itself seemed clear enough. A narrow line of dirt pressed into the ground by people I never saw. I walked slowly at first, letting my legs warm up, listening to the sound of my footsteps in the leaves. The trees closed in until I felt like I was walking into a tunnel made of branches. The deeper I went, the more shut off the world felt. Even the sky above looked smaller. The forest here felt old and untouched, with thick moss on everything and fallen logs that looked like they had been there for decades. There were no sounds except the small ones I made. No birds, no insects, nothing. At first I liked the stillness, but after a while it felt strange, like the forest was holding its breath. As I kept going, the trail became uneven. Exposed roots grabbed at my boots, and I had to watch every step. The air grew warmer the deeper I went, but it wasn't the normal kind of warmth. It felt like the forest was trapping heat and holding it around me. My shirt stuck to my back and the straps of my backpack dug deeper into my shoulders. I kept wiping sweat off my face as the hours passed. The quiet heaviness of the place started crawling into my mind, and I found myself checking behind me every few minutes even though I knew I was alone. After a long stretch of climbing over rocks and weaving around fallen trees, the trail started to curve downhill. The forest floor lowered into a narrow valley, and the light became dim as layers of branches shut out the sun. I could feel the temperature drop again. My skin prickled like something cold was brushing past me. Even though nothing moved, I tightened the straps on my bag and kept walking, trying to shake the feeling off. The trail here looked less used, the dirt softer, like it hadn't been stepped on for a long time. I didn't think much about it at first, but after about 20 minutes I realized something important. I hadn't seen a single trail marker for a long time. I stopped and looked around. Every direction looked the same: dark trees, uneven ground, long rows of moss-covered trunks. I told myself I was still on the path because the ground looked walked on, but the more I stared, the less sure I became. I kept walking anyway, thinking the trail would eventually open up or show a sign again. Instead, the path became harder to follow. The dirt thinned out until it blended with the rest of the forest floor. I bent down a few times to check footprints or signs of people, but I didn't see anything. Not even old boot marks. When the faint path finally disappeared completely, I stopped again, this time with a slow, heavy feeling growing in my stomach. I took my phone out to check the map, but the signal bar was empty. The map wouldn't load. I tried turning around and walking the way I came, but nothing looked familiar anymore. Every tree looked like the last one. The forest felt alive in a different way now, not calm but watchful. My breathing got louder in my ears, and I could feel panic start to rise even though I tried to push it down. I decided to keep moving in one direction, hoping I would run into a landmark or at least a clearing. Instead, the ground became rougher. The soft moss turned into wet mud. The air smelled stronger, like damp soil and something metallic underneath it. I stepped carefully, but the mud pulled at my boots and slowed me down. At one point, my foot sank almost to my ankle, and I had to yank it out with both hands. When I kept walking, the mud only got deeper. It wasn't part of a swamp or a stream. It was just a strange patch of sinking ground in the middle of nowhere. I moved around it and pushed forward. The trees thinned out just enough for a little sunlight to reach the ground, and that small bit of light made me feel a bit calmer. Then I noticed something ahead on the ground, something man-made. I walked toward it slowly, and my stomach dropped when I realized what it was. A torn piece of fabric, sun-faded and stuck to a branch. Next to it was a broken plastic buckle that looked like it belonged to a backpack strap. Both pieces had been there for a long time. I stared at them for a while, trying to think straight. Someone had been here before me. Someone who lost part of their gear and clearly never came back for it. My chest tightened as I looked around the silent forest again. The stillness felt heavier now, like the trees were hiding stories I didn't want to know. I kept moving faster this time. I didn't care about direction anymore. I just wanted out. My legs burned and my breath became rough, but I didn't stop. After what felt like an hour of pushing through bushes and climbing over fallen branches, I finally heard something new, the faint sound of running water. It was the first natural sound I had heard all day. I followed it, hoping it would lead me somewhere open. The stream was narrow but strong, cutting through the forest in a straight line. Seeing it felt like seeing a lifeline. I followed it downstream, slipping a few times on wet rocks but refusing to slow down. After a long stretch, the trees began to thin. The air grew brighter, and then, finally, I saw a dirt road through the trees. When I stepped onto the road, my legs nearly gave out. The relief hit me so hard I had to stand still for a moment and breathe. The forest behind me looked calm again, like nothing had happened. But I knew better. I knew how easy it was to get swallowed by a place like that. How a simple trail could turn into something dangerous without warning. I walked along the road until I found familiar signs again, and after another long hour, I reached my car. The whole hike had felt like a simple plan when I started, but the forest had shown me how quickly things can change and how small a person can feel when they have no control. I didn't tell anyone the full details later. I just knew one thing for certain. I would never step onto a random trail again without knowing exactly where it led. And I would never ignore the feeling of a forest that suddenly becomes too quiet. I planned the hike because I felt like I had been living the same day over and over again, staring at screens, sitting in the same chair, breathing the same stale air inside my room. I wanted something quiet, something that would make me feel like a real person again. The national forest I chose was far from most towns, and most people avoided it because the trails were old, poorly marked, and spread out like messy veins across miles of empty land. That was the part that pulled me in. I wanted to be alone with the trees and the dirt and the open sky. I parked my car at a small gravel pull-off early in the morning. The air felt cold enough to bite the skin on my arms, and the forest looked darker than I expected. It swallowed the early light in a way that made me pause for a moment before stepping forward. I walked in anyway, feeling the weight of my backpack settle across my shoulders as I followed a narrow trail covered in dead pine needles. The smell of the woods was heavy and humid even though the air was cold. The ground felt soft under my boots. Everything around me sounded calm, just the faint movement of branches pushing against each other far above my head. I kept walking deeper until the sound of the outside world faded away. No cars, no voices, not even the hum of distant roads. Just the forest. Even the birds stayed quiet, which felt strange because forests are usually full of them. Every now and then I heard a single crow somewhere far away, but it sounded like it was keeping its distance from the area I had entered. The trees grew taller and thicker, standing so close together that the sky turned into thin blue strips above me. As the hours passed, The trail I followed became harder to see. The markers on the trees looked old and faded. Some were scratched off completely. I kept checking my map, tracing the faded lines with my finger, trying to match where I was. Nothing looked wrong at first. Everything looked similar enough that I didn't worry. I walked slower, though, because something about the forest felt off. I couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the way the trees leaned slightly inward, or how I kept feeling like someone had just stepped behind me, even though every time I looked back there was nothing there but twisted branches and uneven roots. At one point I thought I heard footsteps behind me. Not loud ones, just a soft shift of weight on leaves, the kind you hear when someone tries not to make noise. I stopped walking and stood still, waiting. My breath sounded loud in my own ears. I turned around slowly, trying not to panic. There was no one, just still trees that looked almost frozen. I moved on but kept glancing back every few minutes, trying to shake the feeling that the forest was not as empty as it looked. Around midday, the trail split into two faint paths. My map didn't show a split in this area. The left path looked smoother, like more people had walked through it over the years. The right path looked rougher, narrower, covered in branches as if no one had gone that way in a long time. I wasn't sure which one to take, but something about the left path made me feel uneasy. It looked too clean, too recently used, like someone walked it every day even though this part of the forest was supposed to be remote. I didn't want to meet anyone out here, not after the strange silence and the footsteps I thought I heard, so I chose the right path. The ground slowly sloped downward. The air felt colder the deeper I went, and the light dimmed even though the sun should have been high in the sky. I started to notice things on the ground. Broken branches that looked cut, not snapped. Small piles of stones arranged in odd shapes. Tree trunks with scraped marks low to the ground, like something had been dragged past them. I didn't want to think about what could make marks like that. It didn't look like an animal, and the shapes of the stone piles didn't look natural. The deeper I went, the more I felt watched. Not in a way I could point to, but in a way that kept tightening inside my chest. I kept feeling a slight pressure behind me, like someone slowly matching my pace but staying just far enough away that I couldn't see them. Every time I looked back, the forest looked normal, but the silence felt too thick, like something was holding its breath along with me. I started hearing things too, faint sounds that didn't fit. A single snap of a twig far behind me, the soft crush of leaves, the distant, slow sound of something brushing against bark. Nothing constant, nothing clear, just enough to make my nerves jump every few minutes. My hands felt cold even inside my gloves. I remember wiping sweat from my forehead even though the air felt almost freezing. After another hour, the path completely disappeared. I was standing in an area that looked untouched, with no signs of human footprints. I tried to backtrack, but the way I had come now looked different. Every tree looked like the next one, and I couldn't tell which direction led back to the split in the trail. My map didn't help anymore. I felt panic rising in my throat, a slow, heavy feeling that made it hard to breathe. I decided to walk uphill, figuring it would lead me toward clearer ground. As I climbed, I felt the forest tighten around me. The trees grew closer, their branches creating a roof that blocked almost all the light. The temperature dropped quickly. My fingertips felt numb. I heard the sound again. Footsteps, slow and careful, just behind me. I didn't turn around this time. I knew if I did and saw something, anything, I would panic and run blindly. I forced myself to keep moving uphill. When I reached the top of a small ridge, I finally looked back. There was still nothing behind me, but the forest floor looked disturbed in a way that made my stomach twist. The leaves were pushed aside in a path-like line that stopped only a few feet from where I stood. Something had been following me, no matter how quiet it tried to be. I moved faster. My legs shook from the cold and the fear, but I pushed myself forward, trying to find any sign of the main trail. I slipped on rocks, scraped my hands on rough bark, and nearly tripped over roots. My backpack felt heavier with each step. The silence around me became worse, because now I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I listened for more footsteps behind me, but whoever or whatever had been following me stayed perfectly quiet now. That scared me even more. Just when I felt like I had lost myself completely, I saw a broken wooden post sticking out of the ground. It looked like it used to hold a trail marker. The sight of it filled me with relief so strong that I almost wanted to collapse next to it. It meant I was close to an actual path, something real, something man-made. I followed the direction it pointed, pushing through bushes until I stumbled onto a real trail. A wide one that looked used often. But something about the trail felt wrong immediately. The dirt looked disturbed, like something heavy had been dragged along it not long ago. There were deep marks, uneven and messy, leading down the trail in the direction I needed to go to get back to the parking area. The marks looked too wide to be from shoes and too long to be from an animal. The forest floor beside the trail looked crushed in spots too, like someone large had stepped off the path repeatedly. I didn't want to follow the marks, but the trail was the only way back. The sky had turned darker already, and night in this place would mean freezing temperatures and complete darkness. I walked fast, staying close to the center of the trail, listening for every sound. I kept thinking I felt something behind me but didn't look back again. I didn't want to see anything. I just wanted to get out. After almost an hour, I caught sight of the trees thinning up ahead. I pushed myself into a slow jog, ignoring the burning in my legs. When I reached the last line of trees, I saw my car sitting alone on the gravel pull-off. The sight of it felt unreal, like a dream breaking. I hurried toward it, checking the trees around me, half expecting something to step out. Nothing did. The forest stayed still. When I reached my car, I noticed something that froze me completely. The thin layer of dust on the driver's side door had a long, smeared mark on it, like a hand, or something shaped like one, had slid down the surface. The mark was fresh. It hadn't been there when I arrived earlier. I didn't wait to study it. I unlocked the door with shaking hands, got in, and started the engine as fast as I could. I didn't look at the forest again. I kept my eyes on the road until I was miles away. I never reported anything. I didn't know what to report. All I know is that whatever followed me out there stayed just far enough that I never saw it. But it got close enough to touch my car before I reached it. Close enough to let me know it existed, but not close enough to show itself. I still think about that mark on the door sometimes, especially at night. I keep imagining the moment it touched the car, the moment it realized I was coming back. I try not to think about how long it had been following me or how close it got without me noticing. And most of all, I try not to think about why it stopped where it did. But I know one thing for sure. I will never go back to that forest again. And I will never hike alone in a quiet place ever again, because silence hides things you don't want to meet. I planned the hike to clear my head, not to tear it apart with fear. It was supposed to be a simple 2-day walk along a long valley trail that I had never tried before. I had checked the weather, packed my gear, marked the route on my map, and tried to convince myself that going alone would help me think better. The valley looked quiet from the outside, with thick trees on both sides and long stretches of open ground where the wind moved through the grass like long waves. I reached the trailhead early in the morning and stepped into the woods feeling calm, thinking it would just be another quiet hike. The first few hours were easy. The trail was wide and soft under my boots. The air smelled like wet dirt and pine. The trees stood tall on both sides, and the early sun slipped through them in thin lines. I moved at a steady pace, stopping sometimes to drink water or tighten the straps on my pack. There was nothing unusual at first, just the normal sounds of insects, soft wind, and branches tapping against each other. But after I passed the 3-mile mark, things slowly started to feel different in a way that I couldn't explain right away. The forest grew quieter, as if something had pressed down on the sound around me. Even the wind seemed weaker. I kept walking, but I noticed I was checking behind myself more than usual, like someone was there even though I didn't see anything. The trees grew denser after another mile, with heavy branches hanging low and making the path darker. The smell in the air changed too. It stopped smelling fresh and started smelling like something old, like damp wood that never dries. The dirt on the trail looked disturbed in places, like someone had dragged something across it. At first I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or something else, but the marks were too straight and too long. They trailed off into the deeper trees and didn't look like anything I had seen before. I told myself not to overthink it because I still had a lot of ground to cover. I reached a narrow part of the trail where the trees squeezed close together. The light barely touched the ground. My steps sounded louder there, and every time I lifted my boot, leaves cracked like they were snapping under pressure. That tight space felt wrong in a way I couldn't shake off. I walked faster, trying to get out of it, and when I finally stepped into a small clearing, I felt a wave of relief. But that relief only lasted a few seconds because in the clearing I found something that made me stop cold. There were footprints in the soft dirt, but they weren't fresh. They were old and deep, like someone had stood there for a long time. They faced the trail like someone had been watching it. The strange part was how far apart the footsteps were spaced. They were much wider than a normal person's stride. I crouched down, looking at them closely, and the dirt inside them was packed tightly, like whoever stood there had put a lot of weight on their feet. I tried to ignore the quiet dread crawling up my back, but it was impossible to pretend it wasn't there. I kept moving, trying to stay calm, but that same feeling followed me the whole way. The trail seemed to twist a little too much, like it wanted to turn me around. The branches above made soft creaking sounds that felt sharper than they should. At one point, I stopped to drink water and noticed something else. Far behind me, in the shadows of the trees, the dirt looked disturbed again, as if something heavy had moved across it after I passed. I stared at it for a long time, but the woods were still, and I told myself I was imagining patterns that weren't really there. By the time the sun began dropping behind the ridge, I had reached the point where I planned to set up camp. It was an open area with a flat patch of ground. I set down my pack, stretched my legs, and started getting things ready. I built a small fire, cooked some food, and tried to relax, but the feeling of being watched never went away. I kept seeing small movements at the edge of the trees, tiny shifts in the shadows that made me look up again and again. Every time I turned my head, everything was still, but the stillness felt unnatural, like someone was freezing in place whenever I looked directly at them. When the night settled fully, the darkness in the valley grew thick. The fire lit only a small circle around me. Everything outside that circle looked like a black wall. I lay in my tent, listening to the fire crackle. I tried closing my eyes, but the forest had grown so quiet that even the smallest sound felt sharp. I heard slow movement far off in the trees, something pushing through leaves and stepping on twigs with long pauses in between. It moved like someone who didn't care if they were heard. My heart started hammering. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal, but the steps were too spaced out. They were the same kind of slow, heavy steps I had imagined belonged to those deep footprints. The movement came closer, stopping every few seconds. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing. The sound stopped behind my tent, deep in the dark. Something heavy pressed on the ground, just once, and then everything went silent. I waited for more sound, anything, but nothing came. The silence was worse than the noise. I stayed awake for hours, staring at the ceiling of the tent, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. Slowly, the sounds of the forest returned, and the distant steps never came back. When dawn finally arrived, I packed my things faster than I ever had on any trip. My hands shook the whole time. I didn't even eat breakfast. I just needed to get out of that valley. I walked fast, almost jogging at some points, and every few minutes I checked behind me. The feeling of being watched followed me all the way back to the trailhead, but I never saw anything. The forest looked normal again in the daylight, with soft wind and bird sounds, but the memory of the night made every sound feel tense. When I finally stepped out of the valley and reached my car, I felt the fear slowly loosen. But when I opened the trunk to put my pack inside, I froze. On the back of the car, in the thin layer of dust from the drive-in, there were long streaks down the metal, like someone had dragged their fingers across it during the night. The marks were uneven and far apart from each other, like a hand much larger than mine had touched the car. The dust around the marks was cleanly wiped away, meaning it wasn't from bushes or branches. Someone had stood close enough to the car to touch it. I looked back at the valley, at the quiet line of trees, and felt a cold heaviness settle in my chest. Whatever had been in those woods had followed me to my campsite, had walked near my tent, and had gotten close enough to reach my car without making a sound. I drove away without looking back again. The trail is still open to the public, still marked as a simple moderate hike, but I have never gone back. And I don't plan to, because I know that whatever moved through those woods that night wasn't something wild or lost. It was something that watched people until they were far enough inside the trees where no one else could hear them. And I was lucky enough to leave before it decided I wasn't supposed to. I started the hike late in the morning, thinking it would be an easy loop through a range of hills I had never explored before. I picked the place at random the night before, scrolling through maps until my eyes were tired. The area looked empty, quiet, and simple enough on paper, and I liked that. I wanted a long walk alone with nothing but trees around me. I packed light water, some food, a first aid kit, a thin jacket, and a small flashlight, nothing more. I did not expect anything strange. I did not expect anything dangerous. I just wanted a long day outdoors. The trail began wide and open, with dry leaves covering most of the ground. The air was warm and there was no wind at all. Everything felt still, like the whole place was holding its breath. I noticed how empty the parking area was when I arrived. My car was the only one there. I did not think much of it at first, but as I walked deeper into the forest, the silence became heavier. There were no birds, no insects, not even the usual rustling of small animals. It was the kind of silence that made my own breathing sound too loud. As the hours passed, the trail slowly narrowed. The trees grew closer together, their branches hanging low like they had been untouched for a long time. I kept following the path, but I started to notice small things that made me uneasy. Some of the trees had deep scratches on them, long and rough, like something had scraped along the bark with force. They were too high for a normal animal and too random to be from tools. I tried to ignore them, but the farther I went, the more I saw. Some scratches were fresh, with pale wood showing under the torn bark. After another hour, I reached a split in the trail, but the signs were old, weathered, and unreadable. The map on my phone barely showed the area, just vague outlines. I had to choose one direction anyway, so I picked the left path, which looked slightly more used. It was a mistake that I did not realize until much later. The ground became uneven, with rocks scattered in strange patterns, almost like they had been placed there, not naturally formed. The slope grew steeper. I kept climbing, feeling the sun drop lower through the thick branches. The air felt different too, cooler, heavier, and sharp in a way that made the back of my neck tense up. I drank some water and kept walking. Then the smell started. It was faint at first, something sour mixed with something metallic. I thought maybe it was a dead animal nearby, but it only grew stronger as I moved forward. Clung to the air, thick and rotten. I breathed through my mouth, but even then I could almost taste it. The smell made my stomach twist. I wanted to turn back, but I told myself it was nothing. I had been hiking for hours already, and I didn't want to waste the whole day by panicking over some forest scent. The trail dipped down and led me into a narrow ravine, where the sun barely reached. The ground was damp even though it hadn't rained. Mud sucked at my shoes, and the smell was stronger there. I slowed my steps, scanning the trees and rocks around me. Something felt wrong in a way that was hard to explain. It was the feeling of being watched, the feeling that every step I took was echoing to someone or something hidden nearby. When I reached the bottom of the ravine, I saw the source of the smell. In the middle of the muddy ground, there was a torn backpack half buried, its fabric ripped open. Clothes were scattered around it, dirty and soaked. A shoe lay upside down a few feet away, the laces torn apart. Everything looked like it had been there for a long time, but not long enough to decay naturally. The mud around the backpack had deep footprints in it. They were large, uneven, and messy, like someone had been running or stumbling. There were drag marks too, long shallow trenches in the mud leading toward the dark cluster of trees at the far end of the ravine. I felt something cold run through my entire body. I stood completely still, listening. The forest remained silent, but in a different way now, like it was hiding something rather than simply being quiet. I slowly stepped backward. My heartbeat was loud enough that I felt it in my ears. I knew I had to leave the area immediately. I didn't know what had happened there, but I knew it wasn't something I wanted to get close to. As I turned around to climb back up the slope, I heard something behind me. It was soft at first, like a foot pressing down on wet earth. Then another. Slow, heavy steps, coming from the trees near the drag marks. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what was there. I pushed myself up the slope faster than I ever had climbed anything. My legs burned, but I kept going, slipping on mud, grabbing at roots, forcing myself up. The steps grew louder, faster, and closer. I could hear the crunch of leaves, the thud of weight hitting the ground, the uneven breathing of something moving quickly. When I reached the top, I sprinted along the trail. My lungs felt like they were tearing open, but I didn't stop. Every few seconds I heard branches snapping behind me, then silence, then more snapping. It was following me but keeping its distance, like it was forcing me forward. I didn't dare look over my shoulder. The forest felt endless, the trail twisting and turning like it wanted to keep me trapped inside. My legs were shaking, and my throat burned from breathing so hard, but fear pushed me forward. After what felt like hours, the trees finally thinned. I saw a faint opening ahead where the sunlight was stronger. My heart jumped with desperate relief. When I burst out of the forest and reached the parking area, the silence broke in the loudest way. The world opened up again. Grass, open sky, my car sitting alone. I ran to it, unlocked it with shaking hands, threw myself inside, and locked the doors. I stared at the tree line, waiting to see something emerge, but nothing moved. The forest looked calm, harmless, normal. I drove away without looking back. I never reported anything because I knew no one would believe a story built only on fear and scattered signs. But I know what I saw in that ravine. I know what followed me through that silent forest. It wasn't a ghost or some storybook creature. It was something real, something strong enough to drag a grown person into the trees and leave nothing but scraps behind. And I know one more thing that still keeps me awake at night. Whatever it was, it let me go. I set out early one morning, before the sun had fully risen, with my backpack snug and my boots laced tight. The trail was a narrow path through dense forest, known for its rugged beauty and quiet solitude. It was the kind of place hikers talked about with respect, a real challenge, not crowded with people or easy to navigate. I wanted the peace, the break from everything, but what I got was something else entirely. The first few hours were peaceful. The air was cool, filled with the smell of pine and damp earth. Birds sang far above, and the occasional squirrel darted across the trail. I kept a steady pace, stopping only once to sip water and take a quick bite. My legs ached in that way they do when you push them, but it was a good kind of ache. It meant I was alive and moving. The sun slowly climbed higher, filtering through the trees in golden beams. As the morning edged toward noon, the trail began to twist and climb more steeply. I passed a small creek, its water clear and cold, and stopped briefly to refill my bottle. The sound of rushing water was comforting, but as I stood there, I noticed something strange. Along the bank, there were deep scratches on the bark of several trees. They looked fresh, ragged marks, like something large had clawed at them. I paused, my skin prickling with unease, but told myself it was probably an animal marking its territory. Maybe a bear. I'd seen signs of bears before in other forests. Still, I made a mental note to be extra careful. The trail got rougher. Rocks jutted out sharply, and roots twisted underfoot. My breathing grew heavier as I climbed, and sweat beaded on my forehead despite the shade. I stopped to rest again at a clearing that overlooked a deep valley. The view was stunning, but my gaze caught on something odd across the ridge. A faint plume of smoke, thin and wispy, curling upward between the trees. There were no marked campsites nearby, and I hadn't seen any other hikers all day. A small knot of worry tightened in my chest. Was someone else out here? Or had a fire started by accident? I shook the thought away. I didn't want to imagine anything worse. I pressed on, keeping my eyes peeled. As afternoon slid into early evening, the forest grew darker and the trail less distinct. I passed more trees with those strange claw marks, deeper and more frequent now. They climbed higher on the trunks, some nearly at shoulder height. That didn't make sense to me. Bears could stand on their hind legs, but these marks looked too long, too deliberate. The silence was heavier here, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or snap of a twig underfoot. Then I saw something that made my heart stop. On the ground, near the side of the trail, was a torn piece of fabric. A faded blue, the kind that might come from a jacket or a shirt. It was frayed and dirty, as if it had been dragged through the dirt. I crouched and picked it up carefully. It smelled faintly of smoke and something metallic, like rust or blood. A chill ran down my spine. I had to be honest with myself. This wasn't just some abandoned piece of clothing. Someone had been here, and something bad had happened. The light was fading fast, and I realized I was deeper in the woods than I thought. My phone had no signal, and my map was folded in my pack, useless without daylight to see it clearly. I started to feel trapped. The trail was harder to follow now, marked only by faint blazes on trees that were hard to spot. The sun dipped behind the ridge, and a cold breeze swept through the trees, carrying a faint but unmistakable smell. Smoke, stronger than before, mixed with something else. Something bitter and sharp. I decided I needed to turn back, but as I looked around, I noticed the trail behind me was almost gone. It was as if the forest itself was closing in. Panic crept up quietly at first, then surged. I tried to retrace my steps, but the path I thought I knew was swallowed by shadows and thick underbrush. The claw marks on the trees seemed to multiply, jagged and deep, more than any animal I knew could make. I kept telling myself to stay calm, to think logically. Then I heard it. A low, heavy sound, like something large moving through the trees. Not a branch snapping under a deer's weight, but something heavier, slower. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it echoed in my ears. I stopped dead, trying to listen. The sound moved around me, circling, never fully breaking into view. My mind raced. I thought about bears again, but this felt different. More deliberate, more watching. I fumbled for my flashlight, my fingers trembling, and clicked it on. The beam cut through the gloom, landing on trees, rocks, and undergrowth, but nothing was there. Still, I could feel eyes on me, a pressure in the air. I started moving again, faster this time, stumbling over roots, my breath coming in short gasps. Every step was like pounding a warning drum. Stay away, keep moving. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I finally broke through the forest into a narrow dirt road. It was overgrown but clear enough to follow. Relief flooded me as I realized it led back toward the trailhead. I didn't stop to look back, not even once. My legs ached and my lungs burned, but I pushed on, refusing to slow. When I reached my car, the sun was gone, swallowed by night. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys. I locked the doors and sat there, head resting against the steering wheel, heart still racing. My mind replayed everything, the scratches, the fabric, the sounds. I knew what I'd encountered wasn't just a wild animal or a random hiker. Something dangerous and unknown had been out there, watching, waiting. I called the local ranger the next morning to report the marks and the fabric. They told me no one else had been reported missing recently, and that the area was known for occasional bear activity, but nothing like what I described. Still, they agreed to increase patrols. I never went back to that trail. I stick to safer places now, places with more people and clear paths. The forest has a way of hiding things you don't want to find, and maybe never should. I learned that the hard way. Some parts of nature aren't just beautiful and peaceful. Sometimes they are silent warnings, and if you ignore them, you can end up lost in more than just the woods.